Chapter 1463. What the Lord said next confirmed Luo Fan's speculation, and his facial expression changed drastically. This was because the Lord had said, "A saint has been born in my world." Upon hearing this, Luo Fan was dumbfounded. A sage can be born before the seventh heaven and earth tribulation. He murmured, "Why is it that in the past, seeing anything related to a saint seemed like an extravagant hope, but now saints appear at every turn?" At this moment, the Lord seemed to recall all the things that were happening in his world. He heaved a long sigh with a helpless look on his face, but he did not interrupt Luo Fan's mumbling. After all, Luo Fan was not an ordinary person. Very quickly, he had already gathered his thoughts and said, "How many sages are there? Just one person is enough to make me anxious. If it wasn't for the fact that I'm the creator of that world and am omnipotent in that world, I wouldn't have been able to deal with him. He is omniscient and omniscient. I'm afraid that he has already been destroyed by the saints. If there are a few more of them, I'm afraid that even with my identity in that world, I won't be able to handle it." The Lord sighed. "Since you're saint, why did you come to look for me? Although I'm confident that I'm not weaker than a supreme being, I'm still not confident that I can defeat a saint," Luo Fan said helplessly. "I learned of your abilities from those unworthy disciples. That's not something an ordinary supreme cultivator can do. Even I don't have much hope of escaping from you. If there's a cultivator in this world who is not a sage but can still help me, then it must be you, fellow Taoist," the Holy Venerable said. Luo Fan listened. He could only sigh helplessly. Since the Lord had already said so, it was not appropriate for him to deny it. In any case, he was only here as an avatar. More importantly, he was very interested in the saint that was born from the Lord's world. One had to know that the development of the Lord's world was very likely to be the future of the world in the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos. Therefore, he could only sigh and say, "I can go with you, but you must fill up this seal." Saying, he raised his hand and took out the seal of authority that he had just condensed. The Lord heard that Luo Fan was willing to go. His eyes could not help but light up. When he saw the seal of authority that Luo Fan took out, his expression froze. With a wave of his hand, the seal of authority fell into his hand. He spun the seal of authority a few times and looked at it carefully. The Lord could not help but compliment. "Your ingenuity is indeed admirable." He was actually able to create such a miraculous seal, to be able to turn an intangible authority into something so substantial. Luo Fan did not explain the origin of the seal of authority. She just smiled and waited for the Lord's decision. The Lord's expression did not change much, but his eyes flickered with various thoughts. It was obvious that he was weighing whether it would be a loss to use the seal of authority to deal with the saint that was born in the world. He was the creator of the world. As the existence that helped the world to survive through 6 calamities, his power in the world was really not much different from that of a saint. Although it was his first time seeing the seal of authority, it was already extremely easy for him to fill it up in the world. No matter what kind of things were needed to fill up the seal of authority, it was not a problem for him at all. In an existence that was almost perfect, the potential of everything in the world must be infinite. No matter how many things were used up, as long as the Lord wanted it, it could be replenished naturally. However, this did not mean that the Lord would not care about filling up the seal of authority. One had to know that once the seal of authority was filled up, its owner, namely Luo Fan, could use the seal of authority to obtain almost unlimited authority in the world. This kind of almost unlimited authority was enough to make Luo Fan a supreme existence that was close to that of a saint. Even the power of his supernatural power could be comparable to that of the Lord. It would be extremely difficult for the Lord to make him leave and expel him. This was a huge risk. Apart from an idiot, no one else could easily make such a decision. The Lord carefully considered the advantages and disadvantages of the proposal and finally agreed. This was because he knew that even without the seal of authority, he would definitely need to use a similar method to increase Luo Fan's authority in the world. He needed to make Luo Fan have a power that was comparable to that of a saint in the world. Only then would Luo Fan be able to help him and face the saints together with him. Without such power, Luo Fan would only be like an ant in front of the saint in the world. Why would the Lord waste his energy to seek help from such an existence? Now that Luo Fan had made the seal of authority, although it might be more autonomous, more independent, and more difficult to take away than the authority granted by the Lord, from Luo Fan's point of view, it was inevitable for him to make such a choice. If it was him, he would definitely make the same choice if he had a solution. Since that was the case, the Lord could only agree if he wanted Luo Fan's help. Hearing that the Lord had agreed, Luo Fan then nodded and said, "In that case, thank you, my friend. I just got this seal of authority, but I haven't fully understood how to fill up the authority in it." The Lord smiled helplessly and said, "My friend, please." As he said this, he raised his hand and pointed to the void. A colorful space-time tunnel appeared in front of him and Luo Fan. The aura behind this space-time tunnel was an aura of absolute nothingness. Obviously, this space-time tunnel was connected to the world that the Holy Senior had created after the Lord signaled to Luo Fan. He took a step forward and stepped into the space-time channel. In the blink of an eye, he had disappeared from the flame world. Luo Fan let out a sigh and glanced at the world he had opened up. He followed behind the Lord and entered the space-time tunnel. At the moment when he left the world, there was a thunderous sound in the world. The whole world shook slightly. An inexplicable sadness and an indescribable reluctance came from everywhere in the world. It came from the law of the world and from the tributaries that existed in the world that belonged to the Earth's universe. This sadness, it was a loss of support. In other words, it was the sadness of losing one's parents. At the moment when this sadness emerged, all the living creatures in the world that had the ability to shed tears, they would naturally shed tears. This was the world. It was sad for the departure of its creator. It was sad for the abandonment of its creator. This change lingered for a long time. It lasted for a few years before it finally calmed down. However, to Luo Fan, this was no longer something that he cared about. At this moment, Luo Fan had already passed through the space-time channel and appeared in a strange void that only had one strange world existing in it. That world was obviously created by the Lord. He wanted to cultivate it into a perfect world or even a real big world so that it would become the foundation for him to become a saint. At this moment, the world appeared in the center of the void. It was like a golden elixir that was suspended in the void. Around this world, there was a mass of gray clouds that wrapped around it. This cluster of clouds was extremely mysterious and profound. It faintly emitted a chaotic aura, and it felt as if it was all-encompassing, as if all the profundities of the universe were contained within it. With Luo Fan's familiarity with the state of chaos, he could tell at a glance that although this gray cloud was not really in the state of chaos, it was already extremely similar to the state of chaos. Compared to the gap between the universe and the chaotic state, the endless gray existence was even closer to the chaotic state. There was no need to see how much the world had developed. Just by looking at the layer of gray clouds that was almost in a state of chaos, Luo Fan already knew that the world must have grown to an incredible level over the years. It seems that after going through the sixth apocalypse of heaven and earth, this world is close to the real, perfect world and will soon be able to exist freely in the chaotic state. Perhaps the seventh apocalypse of heaven and earth will be the last obstacle it will encounter. Luo Fan thought, and suddenly there was an inexplicable expectation in his heart. What the Lord was doing right now, he was also doing the same. If the Lord could really walk to the end of this path, did it not mean that he could also walk to the end of this path? The world created by the Lord could be comparable to the real, perfect world after going through the seventh apocalypse of heaven and earth and could really exist in the chaotic state. Did this not mean that he could also cultivate his own world to such a level and really let his own world exist freely in the chaotic state? If that was the case, then the apocalypse of heaven and earth that was about to arrive billions of years later, which would destroy the entire universe and cause it to no longer have any possibility of triggering the apocalypse of heaven and earth, Would it not affect him anymore? Would it not mean that he would be able to obtain unlimited time and finally walk to the saint state and finally become a real sage? Thinking of this, even Luo Fan could not help but feel a little excited. At this moment, the holy venerate had already entered the dusky clouds. It was the seal of authority that Luo Fan handed to him. Obviously, at this moment, the Lord was officially going to fulfill his previous agreement with Luo Fan and fill up the seal of authority. Luo Fan was not in a hurry. He floated in the void and quietly watched the rolling of the cloud while waiting for the Lord to send out his seal of authority. This wait lasted for nearly a month. After a month, the surging gray clouds suddenly underwent a strange change, producing an irregular change. Then, the Lord's incarnation pushed the surrounding gray cloud away and walked out from it, appearing in front of Luo Fan. In his hand, the seal of authority had undergone an earth-shattering change. The size of the entire seal did not change much, but its appearance and aura were completely different. At this moment, the seal of authority did not look dim at all. At this moment, the seal of authority no longer looked dim. Instead, it looked very noble and powerful. When it was held in the hands of the Saint Venerable, it felt like a sun. It seemed to contain enough power to destroy everything. Unsure if it was an illusion, Luo Fan always felt that the Lord's expression was not very good. Of course, he did not mind. He just smiled and said, "Thank you for your hard work, Holy Venerable." The Lord nodded reluctantly. This time, it's really not easy. After saying that, he sent the seal of authority to Luo Fan. Luo Fan raised his hand and grabbed the seal of authority. Instantly, an incomparably wondrous feeling welled up in him. It seemed. Suddenly, there was something in the void in front of him that he was extremely familiar with. Something that was of great benefit to him was calling out to him and attracting him. Immediately after, an endless amount of information appeared in his mind out of thin air. This information, it was information about a world that looked like a golden core. It contained the various rules and laws of that world, the great Tao of that world, the various basic conditions of that world, and even the information of the saints that existed in that world. As expected, Luo Fan let out a long sigh of satisfaction. He pressed his hand down and pressed the seal of authority into his chest. When the seal of authority entered his body, the various feelings that were brought about by the seal of authority became even more intense and obvious. The strong and dazzling light that was contained in the seal of authority and the incomparably noble aura were completely covered at this moment. They disappeared without a trace and could no longer be found. After doing this, Luo Fan said, "I'm ready. Let's go in." The Lord nodded calmly and said, "My friend, please." After saying that, he turned around and stepped into the gray cloud without hesitation and disappeared in front of Luo Fan. He did not care how Luo Fan entered the cloud. Perhaps this was also a manifestation of his depression. After all, he had just given the highest authority of the world that he had created to another cultivator. No matter what, he would feel a little depressed. In this regard, Luo Fan was quite understanding and did not care. With a faint smile, he also stepped into the dusky cloud without any hesitation. The gray cloud was an existence that was extremely close to the state of chaos. If an ordinary cultivator or even a supreme exalt were to step foot into it, then it was extremely likely that the cultivator would be devoured and assimilated at the first possible moment. It was as if they'd encountered the true state of chaos, and they would directly perish while their souls dispersed. However, Luo Fan naturally would not be like that. At this moment, Luo Fan already had the highest authority of the world that was created by the Lord. The gray, almost chaotic existence was born because of that world. Naturally, it was also a part of that world. Therefore, it was obviously not a threat to Luo Fan. When Luo Fan stepped into it, the gray cloud did not even need to be controlled by him. He did not need to brush it away. It naturally moved to the sides and revealed a space that allowed him to pass through. This made it extremely easy for him. He did not encounter any obstacles as he passed through the cloud and arrived outside the world that was like a golden elixir. Looking at this world that he had not seen for a long time, other than the appearance on the surface, Luo Fan could not find any similarities between this world and the world that he had seen before. The entire world at this moment was placed in front of Luo Fan in a completely unfamiliar position. The changes are so big. It seems that the Lord has adjusted the structure of this world many times over these years. Luo Fan sighed. He took a step forward and passed through the barrier of the world. He directly appeared in that world and appeared next to the Lord. At this moment, he already had a completely different feeling from when he was outside. It was a feeling of omniscience, and omnipotence. It was a feeling that there was no living creature in this world and nothing that could hurt him. At the same time, he also felt that the flow of time in this world was many times slower than before. At this moment, the flow of time in this world was only tens of thousands of times faster than the outside world. The flow of time was still extremely fast, so fast that it was even faster than ordinary people could imagine. However, compared to the beginning where hundreds of millions of years passed in just a breath, it was already many times slower. The difference between the flow of time and that of the Earth's universe had also been shortened by many times. This obviously meant that the gap between it and the real perfect world had also been reduced by many times. Of course, this was not because the flow of time in the Earth's universe was the fixed flow of time in the perfect world. Instead, it was because the normal flow of time in the Earth's universe was the flow of time that was deeply engraved in the Lord's life. It was also where the Lord's time dimension was. If the world that the Lord created had become a perfect world, it would naturally be the same as the Lord's time dimension. The flow of time should naturally be the same as the flow of time that was deeply engraved in the Lord's life. And this, obviously, it was the same as the flow of time in the Earth's universe. It was precisely because of this that there was an inference that the flow of time was closer to the flow of time in the Earth's universe. The closer was to the perfect world. Luo Fan sensed it slightly and smiled at the Lord. It seems that we have really passed through another catastrophe. This world will transform into a real perfect world. It can exist in the chaos for a long time. Due to the lack of foundation, this world could not be the same as the real perfect world. It did not need to pass through the catastrophe to become a perfect world. Instead, it needed to grow continuously in the process of passing through the catastrophe to finally reach the level of a perfect world. Moreover, because of some kind of rule that Luo Fan still couldn't understand, no matter how many great tribulations of heaven and earth it went through to grow into a perfect world, after it went through 9 great tribulations of heaven and earth, it would inevitably become a great world. However, this kind of big world might only be slightly stronger than a perfect world. Compared to a normal big world, there was still a huge difference. No matter what, it was still a big world. It would be free from catastrophe and would no longer be threatened by the catastrophe. It could exist forever, and there was no need to worry about when it would be destroyed. This was the most important thing for a cultivator. As for whether this big world was strong or weak, it did not matter. If he was not satisfied with this big world, he would have the ability to create another one after he became a saint. By then, he would be as strong as he wanted to be, theoretically, yes. However, there is still one last obstacle. The Lord nodded and sighed. Luo Fan listened to the Lord sigh, but only smiled and said, "This obstacle can be solved. Although a saint was born, I think the difference between you and the saint is not as big as you think. I think it will be beneficial for him if this world passes through the catastrophe." The Lord sighed and said, "You don't know. Although it's beneficial for the saint to survive the tribulation, it's insignificant compared to the other option." Luo Fan was stunned and asked, "What option?" The Lord smiled bitterly, devouring the catastrophe and turning all the power of the catastrophe into resources for one's own growth so that one can achieve greater growth. Compared to letting this world pass through the catastrophe, this option is naturally more attractive to the saint. How do you know about this? Luo Fan was shocked. He had never thought of this option before. He could imagine that the sages born in this world were definitely not real sages. Instead, they were just like the sages of the devil world and the sages of the central main world. He could also imagine that the saint must want to become a real saint and remove the fake word. However, he had never thought that the saint would actually want to use the power of the great trial of the world to achieve this. The Lord sighed and said, "Back then, when I sensed that a saint was born in this world, I was secretly excited. I thought that a helper had appeared, so I went to talk to him and found out about it." So that's how it is. No wonder you know about it. Luo Fan came to a sudden realization. He knew the reason behind it, but his eyebrows were deeply furrowed. At this time, he deduced again and found that compared to helping the world pass through the catastrophe again and again to grow, the best choice for the fake saint was to devour the power of the catastrophe to achieve his own growth. One must know that the great tribulation of heaven and earth could even cause the entire world to transform. It did not seem impossible for a false sage to transform into a true sage. On the other hand, if a false saint were to become a true saint, then it would be a tremendous change. From then on, they would no longer be controlled by any world, and they would be able to exist freely in the chaotic state and live independently. At that stage, what powerful world could not be created and what great world could not be obtained? Chapter 1464. Why don't we meet the sage first? Luo Fan suggested. Just do as you wish. There are still about 10 million years until the seventh great tribulation of heaven and earth, but there's a lot of time for you to control yourself. The holy venerable sighed. Luo Fan nodded. With a thought, he found a place in this world that did not belong to this world. With a thought, he took a step forward and appeared outside that place in the blink of an eye. It was a piece of chaos, or rather, it was a strange state that was extremely similar to chaos, but it was not the true state of chaos. This was also the place where the sage was in the world in Luo Fan's heart. This place was fundamentally different from the outside world. The various mysteries in it reflected the various mysteries of the state of chaos. It was also the most comfortable place for the fake sage. If the fake sage could turn this strange state of chaos into the true state of chaos, it would mean that he had become a true sage from a fake sage. In other words, before becoming a true sage, the fake sage would not be able to withstand the true state of chaos at all. The distance between this place and this world was extremely strange. It looked like nothingness, yet it also seemed to contain an endless amount of things. It was extremely mysterious and profound. At this moment, Luo Fan also had the power of a sage in this world. All the chaotic environment around him did not affect him at all. In fact, compared to the outside world, the dusky and strange state of chaos in front of him made him feel even more comfortable and joyful. There's a guest coming from afar. Don't tell me the sage doesn't welcome him? Luo Fan looked at the gray state in front of him that did not respond at all and smiled. Upon hearing this, the gray state surged slightly. Then a place calmed down. It vaguely formed a passage that directly extended into the depths of the gray state. This passage was not the passage that really existed. Instead, it was a passage formed by the gray state calming down and distinguishing it from the chaos outside. This passageway still looked gray, and it was filled with a strange state similar to the state of chaos. Luo Fan smiled faintly, lifted his feet, and stepped into that strange, dusky state step by step. As he stepped into that strange, gray state, he felt an indescribable sense of comfort welling up in his heart. He even felt that his breathing had become much smoother, and his body had become much lighter. It was almost as if the shackles that were originally placed on his body had been reduced by a lot. I can finally enjoy this feeling again. I really miss it. Luo Fan took a deep breath. As he inhaled the grayish substance into his lungs, a warm current spread along with it, making his entire body feel inexplicably comfortable. In this strange state, there was no time or space. After a short while, Luo Fan arrived at the center of the dusky state. Luo Fan couldn't help but exclaim in surprise when he saw what was happening. What's wrong? Do you think that a saint can't be a woman? An extremely gentle female voice came into Luo Fan's ears. Luo Fan sighed and said, "Of course not. I'm just surprised. I didn't expect that the first person to become a saint in this world would actually be a woman. I originally thought it would be a man. That's not surprising. Even in this world, the idea that men are superior to women is quite popular." The one who spoke was a woman. She looked extremely delicate and pretty. She had a well-proportioned figure, and her entire body exuded an inexplicable charm. This woman was obviously the saint of this world. She stood there, and the dusky airflow around her seemed to be rotating with her as the center. It constantly circled around her body, and vaguely seemed to transform into one world after another, and these worlds were rapidly being destroyed and destroyed. It formed a complete and cruel cycle. This was because there were simply too many of these worlds, and the changes were simply too fast. Therefore, on the contrary, it seemed so ordinary, as if there were no changes at all. It completely blended into the dusky surroundings, and if one was not careful, it would be easily overlooked. The saint glanced at Luo Fan and said, "You have the aura of a saint on you. You've come into contact with a saint before." When Luo Fan heard that, he smiled and said, "I knew you would be able to tell. That's right, I've indeed come into contact with another saint, and I've listened to that saint's teachings for quite a long time. However, if a saint wants to meet him, I'm afraid it's impossible. Therefore, there's no need to tell me your request. You're very smart." The saint smiled and said, "It's all right. If I wasn't smart enough, I would have died many times over." Luo Fan sighed and said, "Do you want to know what I think about this world?" The saint suddenly asked, "I want to know all the thoughts of a saint, including his views on this world." Luo Fan said without hiding anything, "The thoughts of a saint and the thoughts of a saint were indeed what he was curious about, and what he cared about. Even if the saint in front of him was not a real saint, and was merely a fake one, it would still be the same. This world is a cage that imprisons me and prevents me from transcending." The saint sighed and said, "Indeed." Luo Fan recalled the feeling when he stepped into this strange and misty state, and instantly agreed with what the saint said. He had only obtained the power of a saint, but he already felt inexplicably comfortable in this strange state that was similar to the state of chaos. He felt the intense feeling of breaking free from restraints and obtaining freedom. This was the feeling of a real saint in this world. So naturally, it was even more obvious and intense. However, although he admitted that this was a cage, Luo Fan did not plan to continue the saint's words. Instead, he said, "However, it's also this cage that made you a saint. Without this cage, you're just an ordinary cultivator." "That's right. I agree with that. If it wasn't for that, why would I still stay in this world? I would have left this world long ago and entered a wider world." The female saint did not refute his words and said calmly, "If that's the case, then why aren't you willing to waste some time to help this world survive the great tribulation of the world? Anyway, you have unlimited time, don't you?" Luo Fan said, "Why do you have to say such lies?" The saint said calmly, "Do you think that I can't see the essence of this world? This world's foundation is extremely weak, even with my brand new help. There will only be another 2 or 3 great tribulations of the world. When that time comes, this world will be destroyed. As a saint who can escape this world, even if I leave, I will no longer be a saint. How can there be unlimited time?" The saint said calmly, "There has to be a way. Although the foundation of this world is lacking, it's not enough. Although the foundation of this world is weak, there must be a way to make up for it. If I don't try, how can I give up so easily?" Luo Fan said, "It might be possible to make up for it, but if there's an easier choice, why not choose it? I will use the power of the great tribulation of the world as resources and become a saint who can truly transcend the world. When that time comes, how many worlds will I open? How many worlds will I be able to open? Moreover, it will be a truly perfect world without any flaws in its foundation. Why waste time on a world with such a weak foundation?" The saint said. However, Luo Fan sighed. He suddenly realized that what the saint said made so much sense that he actually couldn't refute it. To a saint, the existence of a world was like his hands and feet. Just like the sand on the roadside, he could play with it however he wanted. to such an existence. He was asked to take risks for a broken world with a weak foundation. Moreover, he was risking his own death. How could she be willing? Not to mention her, even he himself probably wouldn't be willing either. But you guys, why are you so attached to this world? If you can help me absorb the power of the great tribulation of the world, and help me turn from a false saint to a true saint, then I can easily open up a perfect world for you. Even if you want a big world, I can also nurture one for you. Isn't that better than being entangled in this world with a weak foundation? The saint said. When Luo Fan heard this, he didn't even consider this possibility. He directly shook his head and said, "That's impossible." It was indeed impossible. Not only would the Lord not agree to it, but even he would never agree to it. The world opened up by the saint was only the saint's world. If the female saint in front of him became a real saint and opened up a real perfect world in the state of chaos, or even grow this perfect world into a real big world, it would only belong to this female saint. Even if she gave this world to the Lord and Luo Fan, it would not change the nature of this world. What was the difference between Luo Fan and the Lord entering such a world and being in the universe on Earth now? There would still be a saint above their heads, and they would also be unable to control their own lives and destinies. If they could accept this, why would the Lord work so hard to open up a perfect world? Why would he work so hard to let this world survive the great tribulation of the world again and again? Was it because it was fun? Why not? If I become a real saint, the perfect world will be as ordinary as the sand on the roadside to me. I won't care at all if I abandon a few of them to you guys. When that time comes, you guys will just be ants to me, and I won't ignore my identity to deal with ants. So, what do you guys have to worry about? Isn't this kind of solution the best solution? That saint said, maybe this is the best solution. However, it's not me, and it's not something the Lord can agree to. Luo Fan shook his head and said, and more importantly, I don't think you can use the power of the great tribulation of the world to turn the false into the real and become a true saint. If you swallow the power of the great tribulation of the world, the biggest possibility is that you will perish together with this world. The saint said, I don't think so. Since the tribulation of heaven and earth can turn a perfect world into a world without tribulations, immeasurable and everlasting, why can't it turn a false saint like me, who is close to a real saint, into a real saint? What I need to do is to completely absorb all the power of the great tribulation of the world at that time and turn it into resources for my transformation so that I can become a true saint. You see, it's very simple, isn't it? That's impossible. If you really do that, you will definitely perish together with this world. There's no doubt about that, Luo Fan said lightly. Regarding this, Luo Fan only had a vague idea at the beginning. He was not sure about this. However, as time passed, he had already confirmed this point. He truly understood that no matter what method this false saint used, as long as they did not recognize the key to becoming a saint, then it would be impossible for him to become a true saint. That key was to establish a worldview that completely belonged to him. Thinking of this, he could not help but feel regretful. It turned out that when he knew that this saint planned to use the power of the great tribulation of the world to turn the false into the real, in the depths of his heart, he had an inexplicable urge to try this method of becoming a saint. He would first become a false saint in the near-perfect world that he had created, then attract the power of the great tribulation of the world, devour it, and turn into a true saint. But now, after thinking of the true key to becoming a saint, he knew that wouldn't work. He now knew that there were several ways to become a false saint. Among them was the method to become a saint through merit, the method to evolve the great Tao and merge it with the true great Tao, and the method to become a saint with the help of the mystical ability of the saint. All of these methods were enough for him to easily become a false saint in his own world. However, no matter what method he used, the path he took, it was impossible for them to be the same as his worldview. In other words, even if he had sorted out a worldview that completely belonged to him and was completely in line with his understanding of the world, as long as he used these paths to become a false saint, It would be equivalent to him betraying his own worldview. At that time, the possibility of him advancing further would be cut off. From then on, he would never be able to become a true saint, and he would never be able to transcend the world that he had created. Even he was like that. The false saint in front of him hadn't even sorted out his own unique worldview. So how could he break through to become a false saint? Become a true saint? Because of this, his words were resolute and decisive, and he was very certain. The female saint looked at Luo Fan. Her eyes were so deep that they seemed to contain all the wisdom of the universe. It was as if she could see through all of Luo Fan's thoughts at a glance. "You're so sure. You must know something. Perhaps I should carefully search through your memories and study everything you know," the female saint said. Hearing this, Luo Fan frowned and said, "I think you shouldn't be able to do such a thing now. You'd better give up on such plans." Hearing this, the female saint said, "We'll see if I can do it or not." As she spoke, the female saint raised her hand and stretched it out towards Luo Fan. This move looked extremely ordinary, but in Luo Fan's eyes, it seemed to contain all the mysteries of the universe. With this grab, he suddenly felt an indescribable restriction on his body, as if everything about him was enveloped by this grab. This, however, was much more than what he had felt the last time he had faced the attack of a saint. The reason for this was because he had already comprehended the saint's divine ability. Now that he saw the false saint's divine ability, it naturally resonated with the saint's divine ability when he saw the false saint's divine ability. As a result, he was able to sense some of the profundities of this grab. This allowed him to see the mysteries of the saint's attack. However, although this saint was only a false saint, the false saint was only fake because she was limited by the world and couldn't transcend and be free. In fact, her power was actually not much different from that of a real saint in this world. Therefore, although the mysteries contained in this false saint's attack were not stronger than that of the saint's mystique, it also contained many mysteries that the saint's mystique did not. However, it also contained many mysteries that the saint's divine ability did not. After all, this attack was not the saint's divine ability, so the mysteries of the two could not be completely equal. As a result, what Luo Fan could see was only a part of the mysteries of this attack. Fortunately, Luo Fan's authority in this world was omniscient, and omnipotent. The moment this grab appeared, his authority allowed him to temporarily obtain the mysteries of this grab, allowing him to know how to use this move. As such, he raised his hand at the same time and made a grabbing motion toward the woman saint. There was a soft poof. Countless worlds were born at the point where their hands came into contact, and then they were completely destroyed in the next moment. Moreover, this kind of destruction was not the kind that constantly appeared around a female saint's body, the kind that could be reborn and transform into the birth of worlds. Instead, it was the kind of destruction that completely turned into nothingness. Luo Fan used the same method and the same move, but he completely blocked this female saint's grab. It's a pity that once I leave this world, I'll forget the mysteries of this move. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to work so hard for that saint's mystique. What a pity. Luo Fan sighed in his heart. Although this grab had completely copied the mysteries of the saint's move and was not inferior to the female saints, it was a pity that this was not Luo Fan's own ability. Unfortunately, this wasn't Luo Fan's own ability. It wasn't that he had truly comprehended all the mysteries contained within, but that he was now omniscient and omniscient. This was given to him by the omnipotent authority. Strictly speaking, it was not Luo Fan who had learned to use this move, but the world that was using this move. It was just that it was under Luo Fan's control. Because of this nature, once Luo Fan left this world, he would completely forget how to use this move. Although he clearly remembered that he had done this in the past, the subtle changes in this behavior, he would completely forget. He would completely forget that in his eyes, this move should be so ordinary, just like an ordinary person's claw. He would no longer be able to understand the profoundness contained in this move. The female saint frowned, retracted her palm, raised her hand, and gently waved it. In an instant, Luo Fan felt that all the worlds in his body, all the space-time, all the cells, and even everything else seemed to be getting out of his control, wanting to obtain the right to exist independently, and directly disintegrating him as a whole. I see. In an instant, he was suddenly enlightened, but with the help of the omniscient, and omnipotent supreme authority, he directly understood the mysteries of this move. He directly comprehended the profoundness of this move. With a slight tremble, he completely blocked the changes of this move. Next, he did not use the same mystical ability, but instead raised his hand and reached out, grabbing at the female saint. He was going to use the same move that the female saint had used on him just now. He was going to subdue her. The female saint frowned, raised her hand, and pointed. In an instant, countless worlds turned into shields and appeared before that hand, allowing Luo Fan's hand to directly grab onto the shield. An existence that seemed like power, but was not power, instantly surged out from the countless worlds, instantly grabbing onto his hand. Next, a palm appeared in the countless worlds at the same time, a palm that was the same as Luo Fan's, slapping toward Luo Fan with almost the same posture. Seeing this, Luo Fan was shocked. With so many hands slapping out at the same time, it was not a fun thing to do. With a thought, he waved his hand, and in an instant, countless worlds condensed into shields in front of him, blocking the countless palms. Not good. Suddenly, Luo Fan shouted in his heart. His body quickly took a step back. With his step back, his body directly came out of that grayish, chaotic state. At this moment, he felt the world shield that he had constructed collapse with a loud bang. Sure enough, before fully mastering all the magical powers of a sage, I can only be in a stalemate with him at most. I still don't have the slightest chance of winning. Luo Fan secretly sighed. Just now, the mystical ability of the world shield that the female saint had used had the ability to defend and double the backlash. This ability was extremely powerful, but it had the ability to withstand it. This was especially so for saint-level powers. Therefore, when he used the same method and constructed the same world shield, he was unable to double the backlash of the attack that had already gone through the double backlash. After blocking the attack, in the process of the double backlash, all the worlds suddenly collapsed and were completely destroyed by the attack. Chapter 1465. This was the attack of the woman sage. Her omniscient, and omnipotent authority allowed him to master this move in an instant. However, this move also had the same effect as the previous world shield. Although he had already mastered the mystery of this move and was able to perform it, he was unable to use the same move to deal with this move. In desperation, he could only move his body and retreat tens of thousands of light years away in order to barely get out of the range of this move. Fortunately, he was able to master the mystery of this move. Otherwise, even if he wanted to get out of the range of this move, it would have been impossible for him to escape this attack. This kind of authority granted by the Creator is really too troublesome. A murmur sounded in Luo Fan's ears. Then Luo Fan felt that the normal space-time around his body instantly became like the place where the woman sage was, almost in a chaotic state of gray. In this gray state, there was no space or distance. Although the two places were separated by tens of thousands of light years, the moment it took shape, they were already connected. Luo Fan looked up and found that the woman sage was not far away from him. She looked indifferent and was looking at him with eyes full of boundless wisdom. Luo Fan could not help but smile and said, "What do you mean by this, sage?" "I need your memory," the woman sage said faintly. "That's impossible. Don't even think about becoming a sage." Luo Fan shook his head firmly and said, "You can't escape now, and you can't leave. Although I can't deal with you for the time being, that's only temporary. However, that is only a temporary matter. One day, I will definitely be able to subdue you," that female sage said. When Luo Fan heard this, he laughed and said, "If you stay here with me, it's exactly what I want." As he said this, Luo Fan raised his hand and clapped. The slap that the woman sage used on him that he had seen before was directly displayed. He slapped the woman sage fiercely. The woman sage frowned. She raised her hand and waved it, and a strange change appeared. Similarly, it contained mysteries that surpassed the limits of Luo Fan's understanding. Following this change, Luo Fan's slap directly collapsed. It didn't have any effect at all. Not even the changes that triggered this strange state of chaos appeared. Luo Fan saw this. He was not discouraged. Instead, he was overjoyed. In this world, in this heaven and earth, there was nothing he did not know. Omniscient and omnipotent. As long as the woman sage used something, he would be able to grasp it in an instant. The more powerful the technique that the woman sage used, the more powerful the technique he used in this world would be. At the same time, it also meant that his combat power had become increasingly powerful. How could he not feel happy under such circumstances? He raised his hand and punched out without any hesitation. This punch was not one of the techniques that the woman sage had used before. Instead, it was formed by condensing all the power and destructive power of the entire world. It was an incomparably pure destructive power. An incomparably pure destructive power. In this world, although it did not contain the mystery of the way of the sage, it had already reached the extreme of destructive power. Even if a sage had the ability to resist and eliminate such an attack, it would require him to risk the destruction of the entire world and the complete destruction of the entire world. This, of course, did not matter to a real sage. If it was destroyed, then it was destroyed. However, for a false sage who was controlled by this world and could only be a sage in this world, it was completely unacceptable. Therefore, although countless ways to repel Luo Fan's attack flashed through the woman sage's mind, in the end, she could not use any of them. She could only move her body and disappear from Luo Fan's sensing range. She disappeared from the range that Luo Fan could lock onto with the power of this world. She used this method to avoid Luo Fan's extremely pure destructive attack at this time. This attack instantly completely destroyed the strange state of chaos in front of Luo Fan. It caused the surroundings to turn into nothingness. Then, very quickly, under the effect of the rules of this world, everything was restored and the original appearance of this place appeared again. At this moment, the incomparably pure destruction had already returned to the world, but it would no longer cause any damage to the world at this time. Luo Fan had a faint smile on his face. Of course, what he was happy about was not that he had forced the woman sage to retreat, but that he had already mastered the method that the woman sage had used to dodge and move. Or it had been controlled by this world and given to him. I didn't expect a sage to dodge in this way. Luo Fan looked at the countless, indescribable mysteries that appeared in his mind. He felt that he could not even find a way to comprehend them, but he had completely understood them. He could not help but sigh in his heart. After mastering this method, he already knew the location of the woman sage. At that moment, just now, the woman sage had directly integrated herself with the whole world, making herself a part of this world. Or rather, she had become this world. She was not in any one place, but at the same time, she was in any place in this world. It was with this method that she had avoided Luo Fan's detection, and even avoided the detection of this world. After all, just like an ordinary person, he might have an unimaginably deep understanding of his own planet, or a deep understanding of a certain planet in the distant starry sky. However, it was not so easy for him to sense his own heart and the shape of his internal organs. After the woman sage had integrated with this world, if this world wanted to detect her, it would be equivalent to an ordinary person trying to sense the shape of one of his internal organs. It was obviously not that simple. At this time, the woman sage had already reappeared in that gray, almost chaotic state. She looked over from afar, her eyes shining directly on Luo Fan. That strong sense of existence was so strong that he could not ignore it even if he wanted to. At this moment, the woman sage no longer had any intention of concealing her sage aura. That incomparably powerful aura, which had even evolved into an infinite world, directly spread out and shrouded the whole world. This aura contained the infinite way of the sage, which was enough to make all cultivators dream of obtaining it. Along with this aura, it was the woman sage. She slowly walked toward Luo Fan. As a sage, the whole world was her domain. The world itself was the will of the world. Everything was almost under her control. She traveled like this. Heavenly music filled the air, colorful clouds danced, and heaven and earth resonated. All kinds of strange visions surrounded and protected her, making her seem so sacred, so noble, and so mysterious. She walked leisurely, but her speed was extremely fast. The distance of tens of thousands of light years was easily crossed by her almost in an instant. In the blink of an eye, she had already arrived in front of Luo Fan. After arriving here, she stood quietly, looking at Luo Fan. Her eyes had become extremely indifferent, as if there was no emotion in them. For a sage, all those who had not become a sage were nonentities. Even Luo Fan, who had obtained supreme authority and was omniscient and omnipotent in this world, was just a slightly bigger nonentity. The way she looked at Luo Fan now was her real state of mind. This was the look in her eyes. The power of a sage is indeed extraordinary. Luo Fan looked at the woman sage and sighed. Although he could be close to a sage in this world, the essential gap between him and a sage still made him much weaker than a sage, so he could not change the world naturally and respond to nature. Unless he took the initiative, he could not set off such a gorgeous and infinite vision as this woman sage's trip. The woman sage said lightly, "I didn't want to take your life. However, since you kidnapped the world to deal with me, I can't let you live." As she spoke, Luo Fan suddenly felt that the world had changed instantly. The whole world began to shake violently, as if something beyond the limits of the world had appeared in this world, making it impossible for the world to withstand it and almost beginning to collapse. "What have you done?" An anxious voice came into Luo Fan's ears. Then, a figure appeared out of thin air beside Luo Fan. This figure was, of course, the creator of this world, the Holy Venerable. However, at this moment, the Lord's expression was not as indifferent as it had always been. Instead, he looked a little panicked. Although to the outside world, he had only created this world for tens of thousands of years. However, one should not forget that the time dimension inside this world was completely different from the outside world. The tens of thousands of years in the outside world were almost billions of trillions of years for him. That was no less than the time he had spent cultivating in the outside world. After working so hard for this world for such a long time, one could imagine the depth of the Lord's feelings for this world. Now that he suddenly felt that this world was about to collapse and be destroyed, how could he not panic? Perhaps he is mad because of the woman sage. Luo Fan shrugged and said, "A woman is a woman. Even if she became a sage, she is still a woman. She always acts on her emotions." At this time, the Lord was no longer in the mood to care about Luo Fan. That was because he had already seen what it was that caused the entire world to be unable to bear it. It was a handkerchief. A small light red handkerchief, only the size of 4 palms, slightly larger than the handkerchief used by ordinary people. When the handkerchief appeared in the woman sage's hand, it naturally gave off a supreme aura that shook the entire world. Even with the protection of the woman sage's aura, the world was still almost unable to withstand it and was about to collapse. This is the primordial origin spiritual treasure. Looking at the handkerchief, Luo Fan's heart was filled with lightning and thunder, and an indescribable fanaticism surged from the bottom of his heart. Back in the untainted world, with the help of the memory contained in Pangu's primordial spirit, he knew that magic treasures were divided into 4 levels: immortal treasure, primordial unity treasure, Daluo heavenly treasure, and primordial origin spiritual treasure. However, from that time until now, he had lived for billions of years, and even walked through 2 perfect worlds and 1 great world. In this universe on Earth, he was able to travel up and down time, going back and forth between billions of trillions of years. However, all along, he had only seen the first 3 types of magic treasures: Strictly speaking, even the sage-to-be and pseudo-sage treasures were only Daluo heavenly treasures, just like the sage-to-be realm and the pseudo-sage realm, strictly speaking, were also innate Daluo heavenly treasures. As for the legendary primordial origin spiritual treasure, it was a primordial origin spiritual treasure that was on the same level as a sage. However, Thule had only heard of it but not seen it. Now, he actually saw a primordial origin spiritual treasure directly in front of him. The feeling of shock was really unparalleled. It made Luo Fan extremely excited. The handkerchief in front of him. On the surface, it looked so ordinary. It was so ordinary that it looked like an ordinary light red handkerchief. However, Luo Fan was omniscient in this world. The omniscient and omnipotent authority told him very clearly how extraordinary and mysterious this handkerchief was. The most direct manifestation of this was that the magic skills and the means that the woman sage used could be temporarily learned by this world by Luo Fan in an instant. However, this handkerchief had appeared for such a long time, but the world was still continuously integrating the mystery contained in its shape into Luo Fan's heart. From the beginning to the present, the information that the world had integrated into his heart was even enough to make the head of any level 9 pseudo-sage explode. Even the origin of life could not bear it and was destroyed. If it were not for the supreme authority that Luo Fan had, which made him almost omniscient and omnipotent in this world like a sage, the result would have been the same now. It was impossible for him to be as shocked as he was now. No, it's not a primordial origin spiritual treasure. At most, it's a fake primordial origin spiritual treasure. Suddenly, Luo Fan shook his head and sighed. It was not that he had discovered the flaws of this magic treasure, but that he had realized that this magic treasure was a magic treasure refined by the sage. Although its power was infinite, it could never surpass the essence of the woman sage. The woman sage herself was just a fake sage. The magic treasures that she refined were at most, and of course, they were only fake primordial origin spiritual treasures. If it were a real primordial origin spiritual treasure, why would the woman sage need a tangle with Luo Fan and the others? She could just hide in this magic treasure and rush into the state of chaos. If she was still indignant, it would be a trivial matter to destroy this world completely. However, although he knew this, it did not help the current situation. Whether it was a real primordial origin spiritual treasure or a fake primordial origin spiritual treasure, its power was strong enough to make Luo Fan and the holy sage despair. It did not make much difference which one it was. After the woman sage took out the handkerchief, she raised her hand, and the handkerchief instantly floated in the air. As it showed its power, the whole world shook violently again. There were even countless small cracks in every area of the world. Even the great way of the world became shaky at this time. Countless cracks covered every area of the great way. This situation had reached the limit. It was almost a sign that the world would be completely destroyed in the next moment. Stop! The holy sage yelled furiously. Do you want to destroy this world? As he spoke, he frantically sent out his power to strengthen the world, locking the great way of the world, so that the great way of the world could barely maintain itself. As long as the great way was not broken, it did not matter if everything else was broken. At least, it did not matter to the holy sage. He could completely restore it with a thought. However, it was different if the great way was broken. If the great way was broken, the foundation of the world would be completely destroyed. At that time, everything else in the world, including the rules and laws, time, space, matter, and energy, no matter how complete they were, would not be able to last long. In the end, they would go into chaos and destruction, or even disappear completely. At this time, the woman sage looked indifferent. She did not respond to the holy sage's yell at all. At this time, the handkerchief had already spread out and was covering Luo Fan. Seeing this, Luo Fan instantly understood. The sage is indeed unparalleled. However, the female saint had planned for the Lord so well. She knew very well that the Lord would not allow the world that he had created to be completely destroyed. At the moment when the world was about to collapse, he would definitely use some means to protect the world. He would definitely use his supernatural power to keep the world intact. Therefore, she was so unscrupulously using her magic treasure that was beyond the endurance limit of this world. The reason why she could use her magic treasure at will in this world and could release her supernatural power at will without destroying the world. Although the nature of the magic treasure that she refined was not stronger than her, it could cause such a huge pressure to the world that it could not withstand. The reason was actually very simple. It was because her life was connected to this world. Just like how a person could not strangle himself to death with his own hands. Since the woman sage's life was connected to this world, her instinct made her unable to completely release her power here. All her methods and supernatural power seemed to be infinite, but in fact, the power was limited by her own instinct. It allowed her own survival instinct to maintain all the power within the range that the world could bear. As for the magic treasure, it was different. This was because the spirituality of the magic treasure had been erased by the woman sage before it was born. Therefore, it did not have this kind of instinct. The explosion of its power was not limited at all. Once it was used, it would naturally go all out. It did not care whether the world could bear it or not. Therefore, that was why it was like this at this moment. The woman sage could attack at will in this world and exist in this world at will, but the magic treasure that she refined. This fake primordial spiritual treasure, on the contrary, once it was used, the world would collapse and the great Tao would be destroyed. Under the blessing of the authority of the world, Luo Fan's thinking had reached an unimaginable level. In the blink of an eye, he had already understood all these things. For a moment, he could not help but reveal an inexplicable bitter smile. Why bother? However, I am not the Holy Senior, so I don't really care what happens to the world. He said so, with a thought. All the power in this world, all the power, 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 all the power of destruction, in an instant completely condensed, directly blasting towards the handkerchief. No! The Holy Senior screamed in horror. If this force really collided with the handkerchief, there was not even a need to wait for all the power to explode. As long as they made contact, the fluctuations produced at the moment of contact would instantly destroy the entire world. It would make the world that the Holy Senior had painstakingly worked on for billions of trillions of years turn into countless pieces. Moreover, he might even have to pay with his life. At this moment, the Holy Senior suddenly had an indescribable regret in his heart. He regretted that he did not insist on his original plan and did not insist on filling up the seal of authority of Luo Fan. Instead, he directly gave Luo Fan the supreme authority of this world. Now, if the supreme authority of Luo Fan was not brought by the seal of authority, but was given by the Holy Senior, then he could instantly take away the authority of Luo Fan, so that Luo Fan would not be able to condense the power of the entire world to fight against the female saint. In that case, perhaps Luo Fan would fall into the hands of the female saint, and it might make the Holy Senior's efforts to invite him to help go to waste. However, at least the world would be saved. While the Holy Senior was regretting, Luo Fan was feeling lucky. Fortunately, he had insisted on it. Otherwise, the Holy Senior could take away his authority at any time and return him to his original state. At that time, if he did not have the determination and ability to completely destroy the world, he would have died a terrible death when facing the female saint. As for whether the Holy Senior would take away his authority at that time, was there a need to ask? Although Luo Fan had a good relationship with the Holy Senior, in order to protect the world and the last chance to become a saint, the Holy Senior would not hesitate even if the Holy Senior wanted to subdue him and directly give him to the female saint, let alone take away his authority. The serious and indifferent expression of the female saint finally changed. She immediately glanced at the Holy Senior, and there seemed to be a trace of doubt in her eyes. Obviously, she was wondering why the Holy Senior did not take away the supreme authority of Luo Fan. She was very clear about the sacrifices the Holy Senior had made for the world and the expectations he had placed on it. She did not believe that he would give up the world for Luo Fan. The speed of a saint's thinking would only be faster than that of Luo Fan. Almost without spending any time, she had already thought through the calculations that would take an ordinary cultivator hundreds of millions of years to figure out. She had even thought of countless possibilities for the current situation. Very soon, she made a decision. Chapter 1466. Obviously, the sage was not willing to perish together with Luo Fan. In the end, at the last moment, when the power that Luo Fan released was about to collide with the sage's magic weapon and produce a power that was enough to destroy the entire world, the sage stopped the impact and allowed the world to escape the disaster. Seeing this, Luo Fan smiled faintly and watched quietly. As the sage changed her approach, the entire world instantly changed. The feeling of being overwhelmed and about to collapse and be destroyed completely disappeared. The terrifying pressure that the great path exerted on the sacred venerables also disappeared in an instant. The tiny cracks that covered the endless space and time in the entire world were completely restored under the effect of the Great Way. In the blink of an eye, the scene of the end of the world had completely disappeared and was replaced by the original peace and vitality. Sensing this change, the Lord heaved a sigh of relief, and the anxious expression on his face relaxed a lot. After his expression relaxed, he sighed and said, "My friend, what you did this time was a little too much." Luo Fan smiled and said, "It was indeed a little too much. However, it worked very well, didn't it? Now, at least this sage can calm down and communicate with us seriously." The sage looked at Luo Fan indifferently and said, "If you can tell me what you know about the secret of becoming a sage, we will naturally be able to communicate peacefully. Otherwise, all the peace will only be temporary, and all the peace will just be on the surface." Hearing this, the Lord frowned. He turned around and said to Luo Fan, "My friend, do you know about the secret of becoming a sage?" Luo Fan smiled and said, "My friend, what are you talking about? We have discussed the way indirectly and directly countless times. Do you still think that I have any secrets to hide from you?" Hearing this, the Lord nodded and did not ask any more questions. As a powerful venerable who had walked 9 paths in a row and reached this stage, the Lord's confidence was naturally self-evident. That kind of super confidence made him not have the slightest bit of doubt about his own judgment. He thought that he had already understood all of Luo Fan's secrets and knew all of Luo Fan's cultivation secrets. Naturally, he wouldn't be suspicious just because of a few words from others. Even if the person who spoke was a saint, it was no exception. The saint said indifferently, "I don't know what secrets you guys obtained during the Tao discussion, but I have my own judgment. He must be hiding something. He must know some key to becoming a saint. Otherwise, even if I absorb the power of the great tribulation of heaven and earth, I will not be able to become a saint. I can only perish along with this world." Luo Fan laughed and said, "Is there still a need to know any secrets about this? Wouldn't we know as long as we deduce it logically?" Hearing this, not only did the Lord's expression change, but the indifference in the saint's eyes also dissipated a lot and was replaced with an inexplicable doubt. Luo Fan did not wait for them to say anything. Instead, he continued to state his own judgment. Of course, although this was not the core of his judgment, it was still a reasonable judgment. "I came from a world with a real sage. I think you should know about this, Holy Senior." Speaking of this, the Holy Senior nodded. Obviously, Luo Fan did not hide his origin in the Devil Realm. Although he did not directly tell the Lord, since there were traces of it, he naturally could not hide it from the Lord. In that world, there are 7 real saints who are completely unrestrained by the shackles of heaven and earth. 7 true saints. However, although they have taken in countless disciples over the years and wanted to train another real saint, in the end, they could not do it. Until now, after countless years, there are still only 7 saints in that world. What do you guys think this means? Hearing this, both the Lord and the saint's facial expression changed slightly. It cannot be more obvious what this meant. This clearly meant that the difficulty of becoming a saint was countless times more difficult than they had imagined. At this moment, both the Lord and the female saint were very clear about what kind of existence a saint was. This female saint could think of absorbing the power of the catastrophe of heaven and earth to make herself real in such a short period of time. Could it be that the true saints had not thought of this after so many years? Since they must have thought of this, why did they not train another saint after so many years? Obviously, there was only one possibility, which was that this path could not be taken. Indeed, it's just a simple deduction. The Lord sighed. Suddenly, he felt that he had lost all his motivation. According to this deduction, perhaps the method he was using now might not be effective, and it was impossible for him to become a real saint. The female saint was disappointed at first, but she quickly recovered and said, "Although it seems to make sense, there is a huge problem." The Lord's eyes lit up, and he asked, "What problem?" He was more concerned about Luo Fan's answer than the female saint. Although the problem that the female saint encountered seemed different from the problem that he had encountered, it was essentially the same. If the woman sage's method of absorbing the power of the tribulation of heaven and earth was unsuccessful, didn't it mean that his method of cultivating this world into a perfect world and the power of the great heaven and earth in order to obtain unlimited time and become a sage leisurely was also impossible to succeed? After all, with the protection of a real saint who did not have unlimited time? Luo Fan said, "Please go ahead." The female saint said, "How do you know that there are only 7 real saints in that world? You must have been quite weak in that world. With your weakness, how could you be sure that there were only 7 saints in that world and not more? Moreover, even if you were sure that there were only 7 saints in that world, did it mean that the 7 saints did not train more saints? Why couldn't the saints that were trained by the 7 saints recreate the world in the chaos? Recreate the world and leave this world, so you don't know about it?" Hearing this question, Luo Fan laughed and said, "Even though I am not a saint, I know how insignificant any world is to a saint. If they really succeeded in training a real saint, why would the 7 saints care so much about this perfect world? It is even more impossible to say that the real saints that they trained left this world and did not show up in this world. There is no love without a reason in this world. Those true saints trained other saints. Naturally, they would not have no desire. Why would they let them recreate the world in other places and completely ignore the things that happened in this world?" Following Luo Fan's words, the Lord and the female saints' faces became quite unpleasant. "Of course, this is just my guess. Perhaps the truth is just like what you said. Maybe, after all, only the saints can know about the things that happen between the saints. The others who are not saints are just speculations. It is just a guess, and its credibility is questionable. The saints can judge for themselves," Luo Fan said. The female saint's expression did not change because of Luo Fan's words. It was still the same as before, looking a little unpleasant. Although this female saint was only a fake saint who could only be a saint in this world, she was still a saint after all. He could not be more clear about the mentality of a saint. Saints were called saints, but they were not the kind of saints who were moral. They were not the kind of people who only cared about giving and not taking. There is only one reason why a saint would work hard to train other saints, and that was to let those new saints bring benefits to themselves. Perhaps it was to let those new saints join their side to compete with other saints and seize cultivation resources. Perhaps it was to let the new saints help them build a world that could exist for a long time and support their cultivation. This was actually similar to the intention of ordinary cultivators to recruit disciples. It was completely impossible for such a saint to completely leave this world and not participate in any affairs in this world. Based on this deduction, it was obvious that what she said when she refuted Luo Fan earlier was not true at all. She turned around and took a step forward. The female saint disappeared in front of Luo Fan and the Lord. She returned to the strange state of chaos that she had been living in. Seeing that she had left, Luo Fan smiled at the Lord and said, "It seems that the matter has been resolved. The Lord smiled bitterly and said, I would rather it not be resolved like this. What you said just now not only made the female saint give up her previous plan, but it also made me lose the confidence to continue moving forward. Luo Fan smiled and said, Why do you say that? You open up this world and cultivated it into a perfect world. The fundamental purpose of cultivating it into a world is not to become a saint in the process, but to obtain eternal time for cultivation. The current situation does not have much impact on the fundamental goal. The fundamental goal is indeed this, but to understand the mystery of the creation of the world through the process and to seek the possibility of becoming a saint is not far from the fundamental goal. However, it occupies more than half of all the goals. Now, what you said has already eliminated the other half of the goal. The Holy Venerable said with a bitter expression. Luo Fan only smiled and did not say anything more. Since the Lord had said all these, it obviously meant that he had thought it through. If that was the case, why should he say anything more? The Lord sighed for a long time and then said, This time, I have to thank you, my friend. If it wasn't for you, I'm afraid that my previous efforts of billions of years would have been in vain. Didn't you invite me here for this? Why do you need to thank me? Luo Fan smiled. The Lord laughed and said, It seems that it was me who invited you here this time. It was the most correct decision. Hearing this, Luo Fan only smiled. Although the matter had been solved, Luo Fan did not want to leave this world, and the Lord did not ask Luo Fan to leave either. The seventh apocalypse of heaven and earth was the most important apocalypse of heaven and earth. If this apocalypse of heaven and earth was successfully passed, this world would truly break away from the Earth's universe and step into a state of chaos. It would become a truly perfect world and would no longer be shackled by the Earth's universe. Of course, it would no longer be protected by the Earth's universe. This process of change almost contained the deepest mystery of the universe and even the secrets of the saints. If one missed this opportunity, one would not have another one. How could Luo Fan miss it? This was actually the reward the Lord gave to Luo Fan. Of course, the Lord knew this very well. Naturally, he would not let Luo Fan leave at this time. In the next millions of years, Luo Fan and the Holy Senior were discussing Tao in this world. They constantly exchanged their experiences during this period of time. Both of them were constantly creating a perfect world and trying to let the world survive the apocalypse of heaven and earth. Compared to the last time they talked about Tao, their understanding of the way to create the world, they had made great progress. Compared to the past, all of them had undergone earth-shattering improvements. This was good. They had the foundation and necessity to talk about Tao again. After thousands of years, both Luo Fan and the Lord felt that they had gained a lot. Faintly, they both felt that the power of their supernatural powers was much stronger than before. During these thousands of years, the woman's saint. But there was no movement at all. It was as if such a saint did not exist in this world, and had always been holed up in that strange state of chaos. No one knew what she was planning, or she had completely lost interest in the evolution of this world. Since a saint could be born in this world, the prosperity of the cultivation civilization had almost reached its peak. In the entire world, there were countless pseudo-saint existences. There were also many pseudo-saint, level 9 pseudo-saint, and supreme venerables. Although its overall scale was far inferior to the devil world, and even the central origin world, it already possessed some of the majesty of the devil world and possessed a boundless aura. In the tens of millions of years that Luo Fan was here, there were hundreds of ninth-grade pseudo-saints who attempted to break through to the saint realm, creating more than a dozen supreme venerables. Hundreds of ninth-grade pseudo-saints attempted to break through to the saint realm. Naturally, not all of them survived. Aside from those who obtained the holy will and became supreme venerables, the other ninth-grade pseudo-saints who failed to break through to the saint realm died, and their souls scattered. This was because this world and the outside world were wrapped in a layer of gray that was extremely close to the state of chaos, completely isolating this world from the outside world. Therefore, although there were so many supreme venerables, pseudo-saint level 9 pseudo-saint, and even more pseudo-saint cultivators in this world, none of them could leave this world. To them, this world was actually the same as the Earth universe, which was the only existence in the state of chaos. All of their battles, schemes, and expansion could only be done in this world. As a result, because of their efforts, there were countless great kiliocosms, medium kiliocosms, and minor kiliocosms. This made this world gradually have some characteristics of the Earth universe, and it became composed of countless worlds and space-times. This caused the foundation of the world to become more and more profound. At the same time, it also made the upcoming calamity of the world even more difficult to grasp and control, even more difficult to make use of. As the creator of this world, the sacred venerable had a very clear sense of the world calamity. He had already vaguely sensed when the great tribulation of heaven and earth would arrive, when he had survived the sixth tribulation of heaven and earth. As the time of the great tribulation of the heavens and earth drew closer and closer, this feeling became clearer and clearer. On this day, the sacred venerable and Luo Fan ended their discussion. He sighed and said, "It seems that the seventh world calamity is coming. Fellow cultivator, haven't you been waiting for billions of years?" Luo Fan smiled. The Lord sighed and said, "This time's tribulation of heaven and earth will be the most difficult one. If you are not careful, you will be doomed eternally." I can't help but sigh. However, after passing through this world calamity, you will not be a saint, but a saint. With such a huge gain, even if it is a little difficult, it is still acceptable. Luo Fan smiled. Not being a saint was what Luo Fan had concluded. It was the state that the sacred venerable would be in after this world became perfect. The sacred venerable was the creator of this world. He had absolute and supreme authority in this world. Even if he was not a saint, he would be omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipotent. Even if a real saint was born in that world, he would not be able to do anything. He could only be equal to the saint and not hurt him. In this state, he would not be a saint among saints. Naturally, he would not be a saint. However, such a state was still a little dangerous when the world was still a perfect world. A perfect world was different from a great world. It could not be destroyed by a saint. If a real saint was born in this world at this stage, and the real saint was willing to destroy the world to kill him, there was still a possibility that he would die. Only when the world was truly upgraded to a perfect world, to a level that even a real saint could not destroy. The sacred venerable. Only then could he be considered to be truly eternal and indestructible. Only then would there be no possibility of death. From this point of view, after passing through the seventh world calamity, before the ninth great tribulation of heaven and earth was over for the sacred venerable, it was the most dangerous moment. Both Luo Fan and the sacred venerable were very clear about this. However, neither of them said such words that spoiled the mood. The sacred venerable smiled and said, "Not a saint, but a saint." This conclusion is really accurate. With a smile, the sacred venerable changed the topic and said, "I want to go and see the saint. Are you willing to go with me?" Luo Fan smiled and nodded. Then, both of them stood up at the same time. With a single thought, they had already crossed a distance of countless light years and directly arrived at the place that only the two of them and the female saint could find. There was a strange state that was similar to the state of chaos in this world. This state was the state of chaos in this world. All the creatures and all the cultivators in this world, unless they could see the origin directly like Luo Fan and the sacred venerable, would never be able to find this place. Even the cultivators who could sense the chaotic state couldn't tell the difference between this place and the strange state outside the heaven and earth. They could only feel that this was the chaotic state, the chaos outside the heaven and earth. They would never think that there was a supreme and indestructible saint here. The indestructible saint was among them. Luo Fan and the sacred venerable stood outside this strange state and quietly looked at the large gray and strange existence in front of them. "Since you are here, why don't you come in?" The female saint's voice was heard from the strange state at this time. The voice was calm and indifferent, but it contained traces of the mystery that belonged to the way of the saint. Luo Fan and the sacred venerable looked at each other and smiled. Without hesitation, they stepped into the gray and misty place. I think that you should make your cave residence like this. Feeling the inexplicable comfort, Luo Fan could not help but say to the sacred venerable, "After all, this world is not perfect. Everything that is built here in this kind of chaos will be connected together, which is a little inconvenient." The sacred venerable seemed to feel quite comfortable and sighed. As long as you get through this disaster, this kind of disadvantage will not happen again. By then, you can build thousands of such states, and no one will care about you. At this time, the voice of the female saint came into their ears. Then, the figure of the female saint appeared in front of them. It was still the same as before. Her body looked normal, but if one took a closer look, they could see that countless worlds were being born and destroyed quickly. It seemed that there was no difference from before. Even so, if the saint is not willing to let go, I'm afraid that this disaster will not be so easy to get through. I wonder if the saint is willing to let go. The sacred venerable looked at the female saint and smiled. If this world became perfect, then this strange state that was similar to the state of chaos would no longer be the state of chaos of this world. By then, building this kind of strange state that was similar to the state of chaos would be like building a strange world. With the rules of heaven and earth to separate them, they would naturally not be connected together. The situation in front of them that was similar to the state of chaos would be connected in any place between heaven and earth. Of course, it would not happen again. Hearing the sacred venerable's words, the female saint glanced at Luo Fan and said, "Even if I want to do it, this friend will stop me. It will be difficult to succeed. Founder, why are you worried?" Hearing this, the sacred venerable knew that she really did not want to do it and was finally completely relieved. Chapter 1467. These words seem to be the switch to the seventh great tribulation of heaven and earth. In an instant, a strange infernal energy flooded the entire world, flooding the countless great worlds, dimensional realms, and minor dimensions. It filled all the cave abodes opened by the cultivators in this world. It even filled the space and time within the bodies of these cultivators, and it filled their sea of consciousness. Moreover, the murderous aura even pressed down on Luo Fan, the saint, and the saintess. It wanted to rush into their bodies and let them be filled with the same murderous aura, so that they would also be affected by it. Even venerables and grade 9 pseudo-sages would find it hard to detect such a baleful aura. However, for the three of them, who either used their seals of authority to seize it, or relied on themselves as creators, or were born in this world, they discovered the existence of this baleful aura the moment it appeared. These baleful auras were difficult to deal with because they were hard to discover. Now that it had been discovered, it was naturally difficult for it to produce any real effects. In an instant, all of the baleful aura was expelled by the three of them. Although it was filled with this gray, strange state that was extremely similar to the state of primal chaos. However, it no longer had any effect on them. The Holy Venerable's expression was extremely solemn as he said, "The seventh apocalypse of heaven and earth is indeed much more powerful than before. In the past 6 times, this kind of great tribulation baleful chi had never been able to affect me even once. This is the final breakthrough. Whether we break out of the cocoon or suffocate to death within the cocoon will depend on the 7th great tribulation of the world. It naturally won't be simple," that female sage said. At this moment, the female sage's expression also became serious. Since she had decided not to absorb the power of the apocalypse of heaven and earth as a resource to turn the false into the real, the position of the female sage had naturally become the same as that of the Lord. The destruction of the world was a huge loss to the Lord as it almost cut off his path. However, this was also an unacceptable change for the female sage. If this world was really destroyed, as a false saint who was born and raised in this world, Not only would her realm be reduced, she would also be destroyed along with this world. From this perspective, he should be more concerned about the survival of the world compared to the Lord. He cared even more about the great tribulation of heaven and earth. Looks like if we're not careful, we'll really be in danger this time, Luo Fan said. At this moment, an indescribable feeling of oppression surged in the hearts of the three of them. In an instant, all three of their expressions changed. The saint reacted the fastest and said, "Not good. Someone has become a sage with the help of the baneful aura." The Lord's face was filled with despair as he said, "It's over this time. I didn't expect the catastrophe to happen in such a way." At the same time, he could sense that some sort of change was occurring in the world. Luo Fan, who was a split second slower than them, also sensed the change. The great Tao of heaven and earth began to boil at this moment. An endless heavenly light shone. Endless Tao sounds and colorful lights filled the entire world. They filled all the space-time in this world, and even the space-time inside the bodies of all the cultivators in this world. Within the sea of consciousness, this sort of phenomenon was so sacred and wonderful that anyone who sensed this phenomenon would feel an indescribable joy. This was the first time that Luo Fan had seen such a change, but he knew very well that this was not something else. It was because there was a level 9 pseudo-saint or a supreme venerable in this world who had successfully broken through to the saint realm. At this moment, he had already created this world, the highest position in this world, the saint. Then, very soon, Luo Fan saw the person who had become a saint. The person who had become a saint was a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 40s or 50s. His figure was ordinary. His face was also ordinary, but at this moment, in this phenomenon that covered all space-time, he looked so sacred and noble. He gave off the feeling that he was the most supreme existence in this world. He gave off the feeling that he was the incarnation of the great Tao, or even a great existence that was above the great Tao. If it was an ordinary person, they would definitely not notice this person's uniqueness. However, Luo Fan had already seen the female saint, so he was very clear about what a saint should look like. He could tell at a glance that this saint in front of him was not normal. The eyes of this saint were shining. It was not the kind of spiritual light that one would have when one comprehended the great Tao, nor was it the kind of indifference that a saint would have. Instead, it was a kind of murderous aura that was extremely profound and filled this world at this moment. It was a kind of murderous aura that was almost identical to that of a saint. With one look, Luo Fan knew that his ascension to the martial saint realm was triggered by the great tribulation of heaven and earth, and what he had to do after becoming a martial saint. What he was going to do after becoming a saint was to destroy the world and help the great trial of heaven and earth to completely destroy this world. When he realized this, Luo Fan could not help but smile bitterly. The only reason why he could make the female saint yield was because he had kidnapped this world. If the female saint wanted to deal with him, she would have to destroy this world first. Only then would she change her original plan. And now, he had actually met a saint whose goal was to destroy this world, this part of the world. How could he fight against him? How could he protect this world in his hands? For a moment, Luo Fan felt a headache coming on. The Holy Venerable could not help but feel hopeless. At this time, the saint had truly stabilized the saint realm, or rather, he had truly stabilized the state of a false saint. He stood there and looked around. The entire universe, the infinite space-time, the infinite worlds, and everything was reflected in his eyes. In an instant, a look of disgust appeared in his eyes. Then, he said, "What's the point of existence for a world with such an unstable foundation? It's better to destroy it and rebuild it." This sentence contained the way of the saint without any concealment. When it was transmitted, Luo Fan, the Holy Venerable, and the female saint, who could understand the way of the saint, naturally heard it clearly. However, for all other creatures that did not understand it, it was like a rumbling thunder. It was a sound that they clearly knew that there must be a deep meaning in it, but no matter what they tried, they could not distinguish it clearly. No matter what they tried, They could not find out what it was talking about. In this voice, countless worlds shook violently. In the blink of an eye, no one knew how many minor worlds had been destroyed. Even for the almost infinite number of medium-class worlds, a large part of them had suffered irreparable damage in the process and could not be stopped from truly being destroyed. The remaining medium-class worlds that did not head toward destruction were also severely damaged. It was almost as if it had just suffered from the end of the world. In addition, there were the boundless worlds and the worlds that the Holy Venerable had created. In the world that had already condensed into a golden elixir, countless small cracks had also appeared in the process. The cracks spread across every inch of the void of this world and affected every area of this world. Fortunately, the Holy Venerable had already made a lot of preparations before this. At this time, the backup plan that he had left behind worked. With a sweep, all the damage in this world was erased, and everything instantly returned to normal. At this time, the Holy Venerable finally came to his senses. He said, "I'm afraid I'll have to trouble you to deal with this new saint." The female saint did not refuse at this time. She nodded and said, "Leave it to me." This new saint had just become a saint and had a limited understanding of the way of the saint. He was certainly not comparable to the female saint, who had become a saint hundreds of millions of years ago. Therefore, the current female saint obviously had an advantage over him. Among the three of them, the only one who could subdue the new sage would definitely be the female sage. The female saint lifted her feet and took a step forward. Her figure had already disappeared without a trace. When she reappeared, she had already appeared in that strange void. She appeared in front of the new saint who had just become a saint. Previously, perhaps I didn't need to come, and there wouldn't be any danger. Watching the female saint leave, Luo Fan suddenly smiled and said to the Holy Venerable. Of course, the Holy Venerable understood what Luo Fan meant. The seventh apocalypse of heaven and earth could actually create such a fake saint to destroy heaven and earth. At that time, Luo Fan did not come. The female saint wanted to completely absorb the power of the apocalypse of heaven and earth and turn it into resources. She also wanted to fight against the new saint and contribute to this world to survive the apocalypse of heaven and earth. In the end, if she really defeated this new saint, the apocalypse of heaven and earth might be over, and she would still not be able to reach her goal. From this point of view, whether Luo Fan came or not, it would not change much. However, the result wouldn't change much. Although the Lord had to admit that it was reasonable, he did not regret inviting Luo Fan. Before this moment, who would have thought that the seventh apocalypse of heaven and earth would be like this? Who would have thought that things would end up like this? Before knowing, of course, he had to do everything possible to prevent the situation from developing to the worst. Inviting Luo Fan was his second goal. Although his efforts seemed to be in vain, it did not mean that his preparations were in vain. Please don't joke around. The Holy Venerable smiled bitterly. With a light step, his figure instantly returned to his cave abode. He had made countless preparations over the years, and the core of it was obviously his cave abode. Since he had to deal with the apocalypse of heaven and earth, he naturally needed to return to his cave abode to be able to control everything perfectly. Although he could actually control the preparations that he had made previously from any location in this world. Luo Fan raised his eyes and glanced at the female sage and the new saint. He realized that the conversation between the female sage and the new saint had already begun. In this world, he was omniscient and omnipotent. Although the conversation between the two of them was in that strange space and time, they did not use the means of saints to isolate themselves from everyone's detection. Therefore, Luo Fan could clearly hear their conversation. Congratulations on becoming a saint. The female sage came in front of the new saint and bowed. Thank you, my friend. I didn't expect the legend to be true. Countless years ago, there was a female cultivator named Yuan Bai who became a saint. However, because there was no evidence, I always thought it was just a rumor. I didn't expect it to be true. I guess you must be the Saint Yuan Bai, right? The new saint said. I didn't expect there to be a legend about me in this world. How should I address you, my friend? The female sage, who is also the Saint Yuan Bai, said. I've already become a saint. My previous name no longer holds any meaning. Since I intend to destroy the world from now on, my name shall be the World Destroyer. From now on, I am the World Destroyer's saint, the new saint said with a smile. There was an inextinguishable determination in his words. There was an unimaginable determination. The Saint Yuan shook his head and sighed. Why do you want to destroy the world, my friend? Right now, you and I are only false saints who have fused with the world. If I destroy the world, won't I die as well? You've cultivated for 7 trillion years. Are you really willing to lose your life for the sake of destroying the world? The World Destroyer's saint smiled. We are indeed false saints. However, if I destroy the world, I won't die with the world. The Saint Yuan frowned. Could it be that you've been deceived by the great calamity's malevolent aura? Since you're a false saint, you will naturally live and die with the world. How can you not die if the world is destroyed? Hearing this, the World Destroyer saint only shook his head. You're underestimating me, my friend. Since you're a saint, even if you're only a false saint, how can you deceive my intelligence? Since I've made up my mind, I've naturally considered all possible outcomes. I only made this decision after knowing that there won't be any problems. Then what method do you have to escape? The Saint Yuan frowned. My way of survival. It's above the great calamity of the world. The World Destroyer saint smiled. If I succeed in destroying the world, all the power after the world is destroyed will belong to me. I can use it to break through the limit and turn the false into the real, becoming a true saint. From then on, I'll no longer be restricted by time and space. I'll be able to freely travel between the primal chaos. With such a huge reward, if you were me, what would you choose? If it's true, I'll indeed destroy the world. The female saint sighed. She said helplessly, Since you understand me, there's no need to say more. The World Destroyer saint smiled. I'm saying that if it's true. However, absorbing all the power in this world is clearly not enough to turn the false into the real. It's not enough to turn the fake into the real, said Sage Yuan as he shook his head. Why do you say that, my friend? This is the information I obtained from the great calamity's baleful chi. How can it be false? Such empty threats are beneath the demeanor of a saint. The World Destroyer's saint frowned. This isn't empty threats. Turning the false into the real isn't that simple. You just have to destroy the world and devour all the power in this world. If that's the case, won't the world be overflowing with saints? How could it be as rare as it is now? The Saint Yuan shook his head. The World Destroyer saint naturally wouldn't believe these words. He said indifferently, You've never left this world. How do you know that the outside world isn't overflowing with saints? As expected, under the great calamity, even saints can't escape. The female saint sighed. She suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of relief. The World Destroyer saint's mentality was very similar to her previous mentality of wanting to completely absorb all the power in the great calamity of the world to turn the false into the real. She wanted to break through the limit of a false saint and become a true saint. In an instant, she had already understood. In fact, she had been the World Destroyer's saint before. She had been the great calamity of the world. If not for the fact that he had encountered Luo Fan before the great calamity of the world and was awakened by his resolute attitude, the actions of this world annihilation saint would have been the same as hers. With this mentality, she suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of gratitude towards Luo Fan. Looks like you've made up your mind and can't be changed. The Saint Yuan sighed. Of course, the will of a saint cannot be changed. Our standpoints are different, so let's have a battle to decide the victor, the World Destroyer saint said without any emotion in his eyes. As he spoke, the World Destroyer saint raised his hand and pointed at the female saint. In an instant, the void trembled. The rules and laws crumbled under his finger, and the destruction of time and space started spreading in all directions. Even the great Tao began to shake violently at this moment, and countless cracks began to appear. The World Destroyer saint didn't seem to care about the effect his actions would have on the world. Although he hadn't unleashed his full power with his finger, it already possessed unimaginable power, making the great Tao of the world unable to withstand it. The Saint Yuanbai frowned when he saw this. With a wave of his hand, a handkerchief appeared in his hand. This was the chaotic origin spiritual treasure that Saint Yuanbai had spent countless years and effort to refine after becoming a saint. Although the treasure's appearance already brought great pressure to the world, its greatest power was not destruction, but protection. Therefore, when the Saint Yuanbai activated the power of the handkerchief, the pressure it exerted on the world disappeared and turned into some kind of incomparably powerful reinforcement that protected the great Tao of the world, as well as the space-time within a radius of tens of thousands of light years. As the handkerchief disappeared, it protected everything. This was because the attack produced by the World Destroyer Saint's finger that was about to destroy the world seemed like an ordinary attack at this moment. It would no longer have any effect on the world. The World Destroyer Saint frowned. This was the chaotic origin spiritual treasure. It was the only difference between him and the saint that he couldn't eliminate. After all, he had only just become a saint. Although he could casually create a level 9 false saint treasure, he couldn't refine a chaotic origin spiritual treasure in a short period of time. A chaotic origin spiritual treasure was equivalent to a saint-level treasure. To refine some materials into primordial origin spiritual treasures was as difficult as an ordinary person becoming a saint. Even a world annihilation saint would not be able to shorten this period of time by too much. It would definitely take a massive amount of time for the saint to do so. He might not even be able to accelerate time. The effect of time reduction to shorten this period of time. However, because the saint's first reaction was to protect the world, her resistance against this finger was far from enough. As such, her resistance against the finger was far from enough. In an instant, the World Annihilation Saint's finger landed on her palm, causing her body to tremble. She couldn't help but take a few steps back. Of course, as a false saint who had become a false saint in this world, she was naturally eternal and indestructible in this world. Even other sages wouldn't be able to inflict any fatal damage on her. At most, he would only injure her. Therefore, the World Destroyer Saint's finger. However, it only made her take a step back. The World Destroyer Saint only reacted at this moment. It turned out that this was no longer a battle between level 9 false saints. With a thought, the aura on his body quickly spread out, wanting to break through the protection of the saint's treasure and destroy the space-time that was tens of thousands of light years away. However, this was clearly impossible. The saint wanted to protect this world. How could she leave behind such a huge flaw and not make preparations? When the aura from the World Destroyer Saint reached the edge of the protection, it suddenly encountered an indescribably hard barrier. The barrier was so hard that it even reflected all of his aura back. There was not a single trace of it that could break through and harm the space-time outside. It was as if the space-time inside and the space-time outside were two completely different worlds. What can you do even if you protect this world? As long as I don't die, the calamity of this world won't pass. However, I'm an eternal and indestructible saint. This world is destined to be destroyed, the World Destroyer Saint said as he looked at the saint. Yuanbai frowned at first, clearly feeling a headache from the World Destroyer Saint's words. However, very soon, her eyes lit up. The scenes from before flashed across her mind, and she couldn't help but reveal a strange smile. She said, "You are still a saint, so you are eternal and indestructible. You can't be harmed or killed. However, you won't be a saint forever." This made the World Destroyer Saint frown. He had originally thought that it was impossible for the woman sage to see so clearly, but he did not expect her to see it so clearly. He knew very well that he had not become a saint entirely because of his own abilities. Most importantly, he had relied on the Great Calamity's malevolent aura to break through the final barrier to becoming a saint, allowing him to become the World Destroyer Saint he was today. Because he had relied on external forces to achieve this, his status as a saint was still affected by the Great Calamity's malevolent aura. If the Great Calamity's malevolent aura was maintained on him, he would naturally remain a saint. But obviously this is impossible. The Great Calamity of this world was triggered when the world reached a certain level, but it was balanced on the whole. If there was less Great Calamity's malevolent aura elsewhere, the Great Calamity's malevolent aura on his body would naturally flow out, causing the Great Calamity's malevolent aura to return to a balanced state. The changes in the Great Calamity's malevolent aura in the outside world would become more obvious. The more Great Calamity's malevolent aura on his body would flow out. And if the Great Calamity's malevolent aura on his body weakened to a certain level, he would also fall from the Supreme Saint Realm to the Level 9, Pseudo-Saint Realm. Chapter 1468. This was also an important reason why the World Destroyer Saint was bent on destroying the world. Watermark advertisement, test watermark advertisement test. After all, after helping the world destroy the world, he still had a chance to turn the false into the real, to turn the false into the true saint. However, if he sat back and watched the living beings of the world survive the world's great calamity, he would have no chance at all. After saying that, Sage Yuan Bai's expression became indifferent. At this moment, she completely understood that the World Destroyer Saint's desire to destroy the world could not be shaken. With a sigh, the aura of a saint spread out from her body. The power that belonged to a saint began to pour into her primordial origin spirit treasure without limit, causing the handkerchief-like primordial origin spirit treasure to fuse with the void and the great way to become even more inseparable. The World Destroyer Saint's expression was also indifferent. He raised his hand, and a bolt of World Destroyer thunder appeared out of thin air, condensing into a vortex in the sky that was tens of thousands of miles in diameter. Within this vortex, tiny bolts of World Destroyer thunder flowed endlessly according to some mysterious and unimaginable principle. Within each bolt of lightning, there seemed to be countless worlds being destroyed, and each bolt of lightning seemed to be able to completely destroy any great 1,000 worlds. This bolt of World Destroyer thunder spun in the void, exerting an immense pressure on the world. Even with the protection of the fake primordial spiritual treasure, the great Tao of the world trembled slightly at this moment. Clearly, it was under immense pressure. After all, destruction was much easier than defense. Even if Sage Yuan Bai was able to put up a strong defense against the world, under the World Destroyer Saint's methods, it was still difficult to achieve perfection, especially at this moment, when the world was in the midst of a world's great calamity. The method that the World Destroyer Saint used was also in accordance with the requirements of the world's great calamity. Therefore, at this moment, his method was strongly supported by the world's great calamity. As time passed, its power became stronger and more terrifying. This caused the power to become stronger and stronger. It was getting harder and harder to defend against. Sage Yuan Bai's expression became solemn. Both of them were saints. Attacking each other would only cause them to lose face. It was impossible for them to truly cause fatal damage to each other. Therefore, the two of them did not attack each other at this moment. Instead, they went straight for their target. They went straight for their real target, using the world as a chessboard, one to protect the world, the other to destroy it. Let's see who's better. Hurry up and deal with the great calamity of heaven and earth. This apocalyptic thunder has the help of the great calamity's evil chi, so its power will become stronger and stronger. In the end, I'm afraid it will destroy my talisman and destroy the world. Saint Yuan Bai passed the New Year's message to Luo Fan and the Lord through the mysterious connection. Luo Fan and the Lord received the message at the same time. An indescribable sense of urgency welled up in his heart. Originally, when Sage Yuan Bai used the fake primordial origin numinous treasure to protect the great Tao, the two of them were actually a little relieved. After all, Saint Yuan Bai's advantage seemed to be quite huge. The World Annihilation Saint did not have any sage treasures or primordial spiritual treasures. He could not break through the primordial spiritual treasures and truly harm the great Tao of the heavens and earth. The threat he posed seemed to be completely gone. It was clear that the greatest threat in the great tribulation of heaven and earth had been completely eliminated. However, after receiving the message from the female sage and combining it with their own senses, they realized that things were not that simple. A world annihilation saint was indeed not so easy to defeat. In an instant, the sliver of laziness that had appeared in their hearts disappeared without a trace. Luo Fan was currently in that strange, murky, almost chaotic state, while the Lord was in the cave abode that he had been managing for billions of years. After receiving the message, they looked at each other from afar and saw the seriousness in each other's eyes. They nodded and began to act. In order to eliminate the great calamity's evil aura as much as possible, they naturally could not allow the great tribulation of heaven and earth to develop as it did in the past. They could only protect the world from collapsing. Instead, they had to take the initiative to trigger the great calamity's evil aura, so that the great calamity's evil aura would eventually be exhausted. It sounded very grand and lofty. However, the actual method was rather despicable. In order to actively trigger the great calamity's evil aura, there was only one thing that needed to be done, and that was to sow discord. Through this method, the various conflicts, and wars that originally needed to brew for a long time to erupt would be triggered in advance. Whether it was Luo Fan or the Lord, both of them were very clear about this, so they did not have any doubts about the specific method. Although the great tribulation of heaven and earth came in a state of chaos, the way it appeared was directly related to the countless karma that had accumulated since the last great tribulation of heaven and earth. In other words, although the great tribulation of heaven and earth was dangerous, it was ultimately a process of refinement and cleansing. If one could survive the great tribulation of heaven and earth, all the karma that had accumulated since the beginning of time would naturally disappear. Thus, the world would become extremely relaxed, and the countless burdens that the world originally carried would be completely removed. This was also one of the reasons why the world could be greatly improved after surviving the great tribulation of heaven and earth. Only by lightening one's body would one be able to better advance. This was the same whether it was in the secular world or in the world. Therefore, it was not a random choice for Luo Fan and the Lord to sow discord in this world. Instead, they had to follow the countless karma that had been formed between them for many years and many lifetimes. The living beings that already had grudges against each other would quickly become hostile towards each other, towards conflict, and towards war. In the following days, both Luo Fan and the Lord became extremely busy. Each of them had to split into thousands of clones and send them into different boundless worlds, medium-class worlds, and even different regions of this world. They changed into different appearances and wandered between different forces, constantly stirring up discord. Incessantly sowing discord caused the worlds and regions that were already showing signs of chaos to become truly chaotic. The battle that originally needed some time to brew had directly erupted. The originally small-scale war had turned into a large-scale war. The war that originally needed a long time to develop to its peak and cause shocking destruction had now reached its peak at the fastest speed. Just like that, 100 years later, the entire world and countless worlds had already been covered by the flames of war. All the worlds and all the cultivators. Almost all of them had thrown themselves into this vigorous and tragic battle. The great calamity evil aura that permeated the world had been constantly triggered, causing the great calamity evil aura to be constantly consumed in the battle and the deaths of countless living beings, of course. Although they had tried to sow discord, they had tried to trigger the countless contradictions that originally existed in this world in advance. However, Luo Fan and the Lord still did not forget to protect this world. They did not forget to prevent this world from being destroyed in the battle between the many cultivators. In fact, this was the work that involved the most energy for both of them. This world was completely different from before. In the past, the cultivators that existed in this world were far inferior to the Lord and Luo Fan. Naturally, they could easily withstand the aftermath of their battle and easily eliminate the damage that their battle had caused to this world. But now, the number of level 9 fake saints in this world was unimaginable, and the number of supreme venerable ones with holy will was also innumerable. A battle of this level was destructive to the world. It could easily turn billions of light years into dust, and it could even impact the Great Tao, causing the Great Tao to waver. How could it be stopped so easily? If the two of them did not spend a lot of energy on it, this world might be completely destroyed in a battle between supreme venerable ones if they were not careful. In particular, in the past 100 years, the power of the apocalyptic thunder that the World Destroyer Saint had used had increased by more than 100 times. Up until now, although it had still not broken through the obstruction of Saint Yuan Bai's magic treasure, it had almost reached its limit. Faint traces of the terrifying sound of the apocalyptic thunder could be heard continuously, reverberating in the universe. When all living beings heard it, they felt as if the end of the world was right in front of them, as if their own destruction was right in front of them. This was obviously the sign that the apocalyptic thunder was about to break through the obstruction. On this day, Luo Fan frowned and said to the Lord, "My friend, this won't do. At this rate, it will take at least 1,000 years for the great calamity evil Qi to be depleted to the point where it can affect the World Destroyer Saint. However, in less than 100 years, the apocalyptic thunder of the World Destroyer Saint will probably break through the female Saint's obstruction and destroy this world." The Lord obviously felt it as well. When he heard what Luo Fan said, his expression became solemn. After a long time, the Lord said, "I didn't want to use this method at first, but it looks like there's no other way now." Luo Fan frowned and said, "What do you have in mind, my friend?" "I want to start a war to destroy the demons and become gods." The saint no longer had the slightest bit of hesitation on his face as he spoke to Li Hao. Destroy the demons and seal the gods. Luo Fan was able to understand the general trend. When he heard this name, countless thoughts flashed through his mind, and in the blink of an eye, he understood the meaning of the Holy Senior. "Fellow Taoist, do you mean that you and I will each take charge of the major sects, unify all the cultivators in the world, and carry out a cultivator war in the name of destroying the demons and sealing the gods?" "That's right. I hope my friend can help me," the Lord said seriously. When Luo Fan heard this, there was hesitation in his eyes. Unifying all the cultivators to carry out a war of a scale that involved countless worlds and all regions of the world was indeed a way to deplete the great calamity evil Qi to the greatest extent. If the situation developed well, it could even deplete all the great calamity evil Qi in one go and easily survive the great calamity of heaven and earth. However, this also represented a great danger. If they were to participate in this war, even Luo Fan and the Lord would not be able to be like they were now, completely independent of the great calamity of heaven and earth. They would not be able to control the great calamity of heaven and earth and protect this world. Once they decided to do this, the power of the great calamity of heaven and earth would naturally entangle them and make them a part of the great calamity. The great calamity, evil Qi, would affect their feelings and affect their behavior. It would affect their mentality and make them more and more immersed in it. In the end, they might really be completely controlled by the great calamity. In other words, if they decided to do this, they would be taking the initiative to face the great calamity. It was the transcendence that took the initiative to abandon them. It made them, who were originally not in any danger, become dangerous. Apart from that, there was another danger. That was, if they were to enter it, they would not be able to survive. As for the harvest of this world, it would no longer be perfect. If they were not careful, the battle between the two of them might destroy this world. Because of these reasons, although the Lord knew that this was the fastest way to deplete the ominous aura, he did not dare to do so. It was the fastest way to get through the great tribulation of heaven and earth. But it was only at this moment, just as he was about to fail the tribulation. Only then did he propose this method. Luo Fan thought about it carefully. After a while, he nodded. He said, "Since that's the case, then let's destroy the demon and seal the god." Hearing Luo Fan's words, the Lord was overjoyed. He bowed to Luo Fan and said, "Thank you for your help. I will definitely repay you in the future." Luo Fan just smiled and said, "You don't have to be so courteous. I'm doing this to gain enough experience. What he said was not a lie. The reason why Luo Fan agreed to the Lord's help, even though he knew that it might be dangerous for him to participate in the great calamity, was not because of his friendship with the Lord. It was because he was just an incarnation here. Even if he lost this incarnation, it would not affect him in any way. However, this method might allow him to have a deeper understanding of the method of using one's own body to survive the great tribulation of the world. In the future, if he had no choice but to use this method to survive the great tribulation of the world in his own world, his chances of surviving the great tribulation would be greatly increased because of this experience. Hearing this, the Lord did not care. No matter what, Luo Fan agreed to help him, which was a huge favor. Even if the Lord had his own plans, it would not affect this fact. Since the decision had been made, the next step was naturally easy to handle. With Luo Fan and the Lord's authority in this world, they were omnipotent, omniscient, and omniscient. It was too easy for them to unify all the living beings in this world. In just a short span of 10 years, 2 behemoths had appeared in this world. Among these 2 giants, one was established by Luo Fan and was called Luotian Sect. The other was established by the Lord and was called Heaven Snatching Sect. Both of these sects refer to each other as demons. Due to the countless hatred between their members, they hated each other and could not even live under the same sky as each other. There were fights almost every day, and there were battles every day. The scale of the war between the 2 sects increased every day. In the beginning, the void within a radius of tens of thousands of miles was destroyed. Until now, almost every battle ended with the destruction of at least one medium-sized world. The scale of the war had reached an unimaginable level. Under normal circumstances, there would naturally be sober cultivators who would feel that something was wrong with these 2 sects and stay away from them. However, at this time, in the great calamity of the world, all the cultivators were different from usual under the guidance of the karma force. They did not find the situation of the 2 sects strange at all. Instead, they became even more fanatical and threw themselves into it even more urgently. As time passed, the 2 sects gradually broke away from the control of their creators. Unknowingly, Luo Fan and the Lord could no longer change the foundation of the 2 sections. Instead, they were gradually tied to the 2 sects and could no longer break free. They could only be controlled by the 2 sects and began to fight more and more mercilessly. Fortunately, the 2 of them had not been assimilated into their bodies by the great calamity's baleful aura. Although they had no choice but to fight more and more fiercely because of the sect's binding and coercion, they still remembered their original goal. In their battles, they divided their power to protect the world so that it would not be destroyed in their battles. Leader, the heaven-seizing sect has killed another 27 pseudo-sacred disciples of our sect today. We can't take it anymore. Leader, please issue an all-out war order. 80 years later, in Luo Fan's palace, 32 venerable lords knelt in front of him and said, Luo Fan looked at the hatred and fanaticism on the faces of the 32 venerable lords. They knew that if he said no, they might directly rebel and deal with him first. Then, they would issue an all-out war order to fight against the heaven-seizing sect, which was also the sect established by the Lord. He sighed. Once again, he felt the shackles of this system. When the sect was first established, it was just a toy in his hands. His wish was the greatest wish of the sect. His thoughts. It could decide the life and death of the sect. It could decide all the actions of the sect. However, as the sect grew, as more and more cultivators joined the sect, and as more and more cultivators integrated with the sect gradually developed its own will. It was an invisible will. It was like the will of heaven and earth. It was a will that was completely different from the will of living beings. It didn't know how to think or communicate with people, but it would instinctively make everyone in the sect help it grow. All opposing wills in the sect would either be eliminated or assimilated. In the end, they could only become the power of the sect. Even the founder of the sect was the same. At this moment, Luo Fan was like this. Facing the request of the 32 venerable lords, he could only agree. Otherwise, he would become the enemy of this sect and stand on the opposite side of this sect. He would be the first to be crushed by the sect. As he sighed, Luo Fan didn't waste any time and directly said, "The heaven-seizing demon sect has stolen the power of heaven and earth. It is the biggest tumor of heaven and earth. In order to restore heaven and earth to clarity, from today onwards, all disciples of our sect will prepare for war. 3 days later, we will attack the heaven-seizing demon sect together. Our sect will destroy the heaven-seizing demon sect in one battle and restore heaven and earth to clarity." Hearing this, the 32 venerable lords were overjoyed. Sect leader is wise. Li Hao's expression didn't change, but he smiled bitterly in his heart. "If I wasn't wise, you guys would have fallen out with me." The 32 venerable lords weren't all the venerable lords in his Luo Tian sect. In fact, there were close to 100 venerable lords in the sect that he had built. However, the other venerable lords were not interested in the power of the sect due to their personalities or because they were busy. Therefore, the 32 venerable lords were in charge of the specific affairs of the sect. Now that they had received Luo Fan's order, the 32 venerable lords quickly made arrangements. At that moment, the entire Luo Tian sect was filled with excitement and fanaticism. All the disciples and members were filled with an indescribable sense of mission. All they could think about was to kill and erase their opponents. At this moment, Luo Fan could clearly feel that the great calamity chi in heaven and earth had become many times more intense than before. The entire space-time in heaven and earth seemed to be covered by a layer of invisible black fog. At this moment, the thunderous roars of the apocalyptic thunder that came from the space-time enveloped by Saint Yuan Bai's magic treasure became even more intense and louder. Perhaps the reason why the sect founded by Luo Fan and the Lord could be formed so smoothly and developed so smoothly was because of the urging of the thunders. After all, it was the sound of the apocalyptic thunder. Every clap of this thunder would make people feel the terror of the end of the world. Hearing this thunder at all times would cause any cultivator to unknowingly feel an indescribable sense of despair. This would cause them to go crazy, and it would cause them to be even more affected by the killing intent of the calamity. When the Luo Tian sect was mobilizing for war, Luo Fan could clearly see that although the heaven-seizing sect was half a step slower, they were also mobilizing quickly. Their method of mobilizing was very similar to theirs. It was obvious that the Lord had also been captured by his cult. However, this kind of all-out war was obviously what the saint needed. Perhaps he would be very happy to be tied up. Looks like it's time. With a thought, Luo Fan sighed and said to the saint across the space-time, "Indeed, I didn't expect the heaven-seizing sects to be so strong that even I can't change it." The saint was not as happy as Luo Fan thought. Instead, he seemed to be a little emotional. He seemed to be depressed that he was tied up by the sect's will and had no choice but to start a war. Hearing this, Luo Fan sighed and said, "It's the same on my side. You have to be careful, my friend. If we're not careful this time, I'm afraid this world will be destroyed by the two of us." The saint laughed and said, "Just do it, my friend. I've already prepared everything. Actually, I'm quite curious about how strong you are." Luo Fan could not help but laugh and said, "I'm also quite interested in how strong you are." Chapter 1469. Then, the demon and god investiture battle directly enter the battlefield. Watermark advertisement, test watermark advertisement, test in the entire world. In almost every corner of the countless worlds, there were extremely organized, large-scale, and tragic battles. Under the organization of Luo Fan and the Lord, the endless great calamity, evil energy that filled the entire world began to boil. All the great calamity, evil energy that was originally hidden suddenly emerged from its hiding place and began to wreak havoc in the world. It began to stimulate the deeply hidden karma between all the living beings. This karma was not even limited to the two sections. Even within the two sects, there was also an endless force of karma that erupted. As a result, Although the war was under the control of Luo Fan and the Lord, there were all kinds of conspiracies, plots, and all kinds of dark inside stories that people could not bear to look at directly in the war. Countless cultivators were constantly killed by the enemy's attacks, the plots of their own people, and the framing. The entire world seemed to have become an incomparably vast Shura killing field. At this point, even Luo Fan and the Lord had little control over the war between the two sections. Both sides had no way of retreating. Even if Luo Fan and the Lord both said that they wanted to retreat at the same time, they might not be able to stop the war that was pushing the entire world towards destruction and doomsday. Moreover, the situation of the entire battlefield had forced them to try their best to plot against each other and attack each other. In the process, the entire world seemed to be constantly lingering on the verge of destruction. The aftermath of the battle that broke out in the countless worlds and space-time between the heavens and the earth continued to destroy the world. It constantly pushed the world into the abyss of destruction. There were even countless cracks in the great Tao of heaven and earth, which seemed to be on the verge of collapse. In the next moment, the protection that the Lord had set up broke out. It pulled the world back from the abyss of destruction. It made the countless cracks in the great Tao of heaven and earth heal again. However, that was all. Although the Great Way could be restored, the Lord and Luo Fan had devoted almost all their attention to fighting against each other and did not pay much attention to controlling the recovery of the Great Way of heaven and earth. As a result, the Great Tao was able to recover under his backup plan. However, the destroyed worlds and space-time could only remain as they were. They could only wait for time to develop and for the great path of the world to slowly recover. As a result, even though the great path of heaven and earth was undamaged, the more they fought, the more broken it became. The more they fought, the closer they were to destruction, to the abyss of annihilation from the outside. The golden elixir, which was originally a peaceful world, was now filled with countless cracks. The interior of the golden core of the entire world had already become extremely dilapidated. He didn't even know when he would suddenly collapse into countless fine fragments and scatter in all directions. He didn't even know when he would be devoured by the gray, almost chaotic state of SUO8. This process of change, combined with the sound of the world-destroying thunder that came from within the range of Saint Yuan Bai's magical treasure, caused more and more living beings to believe that this world, this part of the world, had come to an end. This made them increasingly believe that the end of the world was right in front of them. Because of this mentality, the craziness in their hearts exploded, causing them to attack and destroy other living beings in an even more frenzied manner. As a result, the great calamity's murderous aura boiled even more intensely, causing the speed of the destruction of the entire world to accelerate. In the short 10 years since the final demon and god investiture battle broke out, there was no longer a single intact space-time in the entire world. There was no longer a single intact layer of rules and laws. The entire world, the endless worlds, were in absolute chaos. Countless worlds created and destroyed by the aftermath of the battle filled the entire world. The ordinary mortals and ordinary living beings had already been completely wiped out during this period of time. The cultivators who didn't join the two sects had also either died or joined the two sects due to the aftermath of the battle. The entire boundless world, which contained countless worlds, at this time, only the billions of people and disciples of the two sects were left. At the same time, the billions of people and disciples were dying at an unimaginable speed. The great calamity's murderous aura that filled the entire world and the endless worlds had already boiled to the point where its true appearance was revealed. It covered the sky, the earth, and even the layer of rules and laws. It filled every location in the universe, every location that could accommodate the existence of the great calamity's murderous aura. Even for Luo Fan and the Lord, although their bodies were not invaded by the great calamity's murderous aura, the great calamity's murderous aura around them had already surpassed the entire world. Almost all the other places in the world combined could not compare to the amount of murderous aura that gathered around them. Although such a large amount of murderous aura could not directly control their thoughts. It had covered their spiritual sense, causing their supreme authority in the universe to be affected. It even distorted their orders to the world, causing them to only be able to target their opponents. No matter what orders they issued, no matter what they wanted to do with the help of the world, it would eventually be transferred to their opponents and turned into attacks after various unbelievable transformations. Although Luo Fan and the Lord had long expected that the situation would get out of hand, they still did not expect that the Great Calamity's murderous aura would be so desperate to distort their minds and affect their actions in such a violent and direct way. Occasionally, when they contacted each other, they could only smile bitterly. However, since things had already developed to this stage, no matter what they did, it was obvious that they could not change the reality. Therefore, on this day, Luo Fan and the Lord created a vast and boundless world together. They moved all the cultivators and all the people who belonged to their sects into that world and formed two sides. They faced each other from afar. A strong sense of hostility filled the world. Gradually, all the Great Calamity's murderous aura in the world was drawn over and gradually condensed. At this moment, it was unknown whether it was an illusion, but it was coming from the area that Sage Yuan Bai's magical treasure was defending. The thunderous roars of the Armageddon lightning grew even louder and denser, as if the impact had grown stronger. My two friends, you'd better hurry up. Although a lot of the Great Calamity's murderous aura of the apocalyptic saint has been extracted, this extraction has given him strength, allowing him to unleash a power that was 100 times stronger than usual. I can't hold on for much longer. Sage Yuan Bai sent a message to Luo Fan and the Lord through a mysterious connection. Upon hearing this, the same phrase appeared in Luo Fan and the Lord's mind at the same time. The final radiance of the setting sun. That's right, at this moment, the change that was happening to the apocalyptic saint was the final radiance of the setting sun. Because the Great Calamity's murderous aura was constantly being consumed, the apocalyptic saint was now on the verge of dropping to a lower level. Therefore, the apocalyptic saint had unleashed all of his power, wanting to seize the last opportunity to fight to the death. In the secular world, this was obviously the final radiance of the setting sun. After understanding this, although Luo Fan and the Lord were a little anxious, they were more excited. The world annihilation saint was now in the final radiance of the setting sun. This clearly meant that their efforts over the years had paid off. Now, they were indeed weakening the world annihilation saint. If this continued, there was indeed hope for them to survive this calamity. After understanding this, the two of them looked at each other and smiled. The conflict between the Luotian sect and the heaven-seizing sect had become secondary in recent years. All the disciples of the Luotian sect knew very well that what they needed to do was to completely destroy the people of the other sect in front of them and completely obliterate their life source. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan and the Lord naturally did not need to argue. After arranging their formation, they suddenly launched their attack, directly triggering their sect's disciples to condense their strongest power and the most terrifying magic to collide with the opponent and fight. At the same time, both Luo Fan and the Lord arrived in the void at the same time, facing each other from a distance of tens of feet. "My friend, please." Luo Fan smiled. "Be careful, my friend." The Lord nodded and smiled as well. After saying this, he raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. A stream of turbid air appeared in the void. This stream of turbid air was extremely turbid, and it felt even heavier and more turbid than the gray chaos. This was refined by a saint venerable according to the characteristics of this world. It was a kind of the most basic and most original destructive power. In this stream of turbid air, even a sesame seed the size of a sesame seed had the weight of a colossal world. When it exploded, it was enough to completely destroy thousands of colossal worlds. This was a method of attack that completely abandoned all flashy but impractical appearances. It was also the essence of the Lord's supreme authority over this world. Facing such a stream of turbid air, Luo Fan instantly knew its power. With a smile, he raised his hand and pointed, and a stream of clear air appeared out of nowhere. Clear and turbid were the opposite of each other. Since the Lord had condensed a stream of turbid air, Luo Fan deduced based on this stream of turbid air. It was at the same level as this stream of turbid air, but it completely targeted this stream of turbid air. Obviously, it was a stream of clear air. After this stream of clear air appeared, it produced an earth-shattering buoyant force. Under this buoyant force, the entire world, including all the creatures in this world, seemed to have become countless times lighter. It was as if it was slowly floating up, breaking away from a place that was full of shackles and shackles. However, this feeling soon disappeared under the shock of the turbid air. Every bit of the turbid chi was as heavy as a great thousand worlds. As it trembled, the heavy feeling it produced was enough to eliminate the buoyancy caused by the clear chi. On the contrary, it even made the entire world feel like it was sinking, as if it was being bound by more and more shackles and shackles. This change in weight happened so quickly that all the creatures and cultivators in this world could not even notice it. In the blink of an eye, the clear air and the turbid air had already collided. A huge, invisible shock erupted from the point of contact between the two. Not only did it engulf the world that was jointly created by Luo Fan and the Lord, but it also engulfed the entire golden elixir of this world. After a crisp cracking sound, a huge crack suddenly appeared on the golden elixir of this world, almost splitting the golden elixir of this world into two halves. If the Lord had not made sufficient preparations earlier, in an instant, there was an invisible force that closed the crack. If the crack did not really separate the golden elixir, the entire world would have been split into two parts at this time. It would have directly headed towards destruction, the turbid air that was emitted by the Lord. It was the most basic source of destruction, the most basic and most direct destruction. Although the appearance of Luo Fan's clear air was different, its nature was surprisingly similar. Similarly, it was a direct destruction that abandoned all transformations, the origin, the foundation. The moment the two came into contact, the change that occurred was almost comparable to the change that occurred in the moment when the two of them tried to create a perfect world. Within it, there were billions of worlds that were created, combined, and evolved at the same time. When it reached its peak, it would then be destroyed. During this process, the great evil aura that had gathered around the two of them, which occupied almost half of the entire world, was crazily thrown into the world. It continued to merge into the world and was gradually assimilated by the world. In the end, it disappeared without a trace, as if it had never existed. This was actually not the effect of these worlds. It was just a manifestation of the natural changes of the great evil aura at this time. It was not that these worlds took the initiative to absorb the great evil aura and consume the great evil aura. Instead, the great evil aura would naturally be consumed due to the direct confrontation between Luo Fan and the Lord. It was just that at this time, because of the existence of these worlds, it directly rushed into the world and was naturally consumed through the transformation. In other words, the current situation was only a manifestation of the great evil aura being consumed. It was not the root cause. Luo Fan and the Lord were both floating in the void. Both of them were controlling the clear and turbid chi. They were constantly changing and creating all kinds of unbelievable changes. They were constantly using all kinds of methods to attack the chi that the other party was controlling. They were constantly trying to destroy the other party. Waves of shockwaves that were strong enough to tear the heaven and earth into pieces continued to erupt in the process. They swept across the sky and earth, creating cracks that went straight to the center of the world. Again and again, the world was pushed to the edge of the abyss of complete destruction, only to be pulled back by the Lord's means. With every change, a huge amount of the great evil aura was consumed. It caused the World Annihilation Saint, who was being sealed by Saint Yuan Bai, to lose a large amount of evil aura, causing the World Annihilation Saint to become even crazier. Just as they were controlling the clear and turbid chi in the void to carry out a direct and tragic battle, the disciples of the two sects below them did not care about how they were fighting. They were only crazily killing each other. They were crazily destroying each other. The endless power of destruction gradually filled this vast world. This was an extremely stable world. However, although the world was stable, it could not eliminate the aftershocks of the boundless destructive energy. These aftershocks continued to spread, causing the world, which was already riddled with holes, to be damaged again and again, causing the world to become even more damaged. However, although the great evil aura was constantly boiling during their battle and seemed to be even more terrifying, as more and more cultivators died in the hands of the cultivators who had deep karmic ties with them. The overall amount of the evil aura was constantly decreasing. Obviously, due to the ending of the karmic ties and the elimination of karma, the great evil aura had lost its source of power. In the end, it would naturally be gradually consumed. This also proved that Luo Fan and the Lord's plan had succeeded. Even a pseudo-sacred stage cultivator would not be able to hold on for long in this Azura battleground. In a short span of less than 10 days, there were many cultivators in this world, but they had already been consumed to the point where there were less than 10,000 people left. The cultivators in this world had become sparse. They were scattered all over the world, constantly bombarding each other with all kinds of powerful magical powers. Their eyes were bloodshot as they wanted to eliminate their opponents and destroy the living creatures that they had an irreconcilable hatred with. These cultivators who were able to stay until the end were almost the strongest among all the cultivators. Among them, none of them were lower than the pseudo-saint level. At this time, the overall amount of the great evil aura in this world had been reduced to less than 1/10,000th of the original amount. However, because all the evil aura had completely boiled, the changes were tens of thousands of times more intense than before. Therefore, it looked more dangerous and tragic than before. The entire world was so dark that one could not even see their own fingers. Everything was covered by the pitch-black evil aura. **T. Just when Luo Fan and the Lord were secretly rejoicing and felt that victory was right in front of them, St. Yuan Bai's exclamation was heard. After that, a strand of terrifying energy of annihilation erupted from him. In the void, there was an incomparably huge ball of world-destroying thunder that was hundreds of thousands of light years in diameter. It broke through a layer of strange barrier and squeezed out of it with great difficulty. During this process, the world gold core finally could not bear it anymore. The countless cracks that originally existed on its surface finally began to expand uncontrollably. Finally, it broke through all the preparations that the Lord had made and completely tore the world gold core apart. Although it was originally severely damaged, the world gold core was still considered complete. The world golden core, which was still considered complete, turned into countless fragments at this moment. Countless fine fragments of space-time splashed in all directions. Damn it! The Lord roared at this time. At this moment, the incomparably rich, great evil aura that permeated around his and Luo Fan's bodies suddenly completely separated from their bodies. It crazily shot up toward the place where the world-destroying thunder was. Without the great evil aura, Luo Fan and the Lord naturally did not need to fight like before, where they could tear the world gold core apart again and again. At this moment, Luo Fan and the Lord each withdrew their clear and murky chi. They looked at each other and took a step forward. Their figures had already arrived in the unseen world, where the great path was located. Although the world gold core had already been torn apart, the great path of heaven and earth still existed. It was still not destroyed. This meant that the world had not perished yet. This meant that the great path of heaven and earth had not completely failed. At this moment, there were already two people in the unseen world. They were St. Yuan Bai and the World Destroyer Saint. At this moment, St. Yuan Bai's magic treasure had already completely enveloped the great path of heaven and earth, protecting it firmly. Compared to its original flawless appearance, This magic treasure had completely changed. Right now, the handkerchief looked extremely tattered. There were holes and cracks all over it. In many places, only a few threads were left to connect the handkerchief. It seemed that with just a little bit of force, the handkerchief would break and shatter. Opposite Sage Yuan Bai, the world annihilation saint raised both his hands and forcefully pulled on the world annihilation sacred thunder that was destroying the golden elixir of the world. He wanted to pull the world annihilation sacred thunder into the unseen world and completely destroy the great path of the world. The reason why Saint Yuan Bai had protected the great path at this moment was obviously to prevent the world destroyer saint from pulling the world-destroying thunder into the unseen world to destroy the great path. At this moment, Saint Yuan Bai raised his hands and pressed down on the magic treasure that was enveloping the great path. He continuously channeled energy into the magic treasure, protecting it with great difficulty to prevent it from shattering due to the destruction of the outside world. For a moment, she could not spare any energy to stop the world destroyer saint. This was already her last foundation. If this great path was also destroyed, as a saint, she would die instantly. When Luo Fan and the Lord saw the situation in front of them, they immediately made a decision. The two of them looked at each other and released clear and murky chi. As they spiraled, they instantly arrived beside the world destroyer saint and slammed into him. Chapter 1470. The world destroyer saint seemed to have given it his all. Although he could see the clear and turbid chi that Luo Fan and the Lord had blasted at him, he did not even have the ability to dodge. He could only let the clear and turbid chi hit his body. Originally, as a saint, even the pure destructive power of the clear and turbid chi could not hurt him. At most, it could only push him back. However, the situation at this moment was completely different from normal. When the clear and turbid aura collided with the world annihilation saint, the world annihilation saint's body trembled. Half of his body was instantly annihilated by the clear and turbid aura. At this moment, Luo Fan and the Lord realized that although the world destroyer saint's magical power had greatly increased, he had almost lost his identity as a saint. At this moment, in this world, or perhaps in this world, his identity as a saint was no longer useful. It was no longer indestructible and indestructible. After realizing this, how could the two of them still be polite to him? Immediately, the clear and turbid chi began to stir violently. In the blink of an eye, the world destroyer saint was crushed and annihilated, turning into nothingness. However, even so, it did not mean that Luo Fan and the Lord had won. It also did not mean that the world destroyer saint was dead. After all, he was a saint. Even if he was a fake saint who was about to lose his identity, he was still a saint. How could he die so easily? Although his physical body had been completely annihilated by the clear and turbid chi released by Luo Fan and the Lord, the remaining bit of saint essence still existed. This bit of saint essence was close to the holy decree. However, it was tens of thousands of times more powerful and mysterious than the holy decree obtained by ordinary venerables. It turned out that it was hidden inside the saint's body and was concealed by the saint's aura. It was concealed by his power and even by his body. However, at this moment, the concealment was gone. The saint essence, which was many times stronger than the one before, was finally revealed without any concealment. It was an illusory figure. Its appearance was naturally that of the world annihilation saint. However, compared to the previous world destroyer saint, he was much more powerful. The illusory figure's expression was a little sluggish, but the determination to destroy the world in its eyes was even more resolute and shocking. The essence of this saint was extremely fundamental and pure. It was eternal and indestructible. The entire phantom seemed to be the complete embodiment of eternity and invulnerability to all tribulations. The clear and turbid chi released by Luo Fan and the Lord had no effect on such a virtual shadow. Although the clear and turbid chi was shuttling back and forth on the illusory figure, the clear and turbid chi didn't stop. The continuous impacts and vibrations seemed to have no effect on the phantom at all, as if it was in a completely different space-time dimension from the phantom. It couldn't even vibrate the phantom at all, let alone shatter it. Oh no, Luo-Fan and the Lord did not know what to do. Although they were omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipotent in this world, they could not do anything. He would look no different from a saint. But they weren't saints after all. They weren't even fake saints. Under such circumstances, they naturally couldn't understand the most fundamental essence of a saint. And if they couldn't understand it, how could they destroy it? My two friends, don't worry about it. You just need to target the great calamity evil chi and eliminate it as much as possible. That way, you can destroy the saint's essence. Saint Yuan Bai, who was at the side, said, "The one who understood the essence of a saint the most was, of course, the female saint, who was also a saint. However, it could be seen from the battle between the female saint and the world annihilation saint. Even she couldn't do anything about the saint's essence of the world annihilation saint. If she could do anything about it, why would she be so helpless against the world annihilation saint? Why would she only be able to repel him? She would have already killed him through some means. However, she was a saint after all, and her understanding of the essence of a saint was extraordinary. Although she couldn't destroy the essence of a saint, she could clearly see the weakness of the essence of a saint and knew where the true support of the essence of a saint lay. That was why she could guide Luo-Fan and the Holy Venerable at this time. When Luo-Fan and the Holy Venerable heard what Saint Yuan Bai said, their eyes lit up. Although they couldn't do anything about the essence of a saint, they could do something about the incomparably dense and usually undetectable great calamity evil chi that lingered above the essence of a saint. With a thought, the two of them looked at each other. They saw what they wanted to see in each other's eyes. Then, they nodded their heads and sent out their clear and turbid chi to collide with the essence of a saint. This collision produced a terrifying impact that constantly impacted the boundless and inexplicable great path below. If it wasn't for the protection of Saint Yuan Bai's broken, chaotic origin spiritual treasure, perhaps such a collision would have been enough to cause the great path to collapse. However, this was naturally not the case at this time. Although the chaotic origin spiritual treasure wasn't a saint, it was still an existence of the false saint level. Such an existence was only slightly weaker than the essence of a saint. Even if the clear and turbid chi directly bombarded it, it would at most shake, but it wouldn't be completely destroyed. As a result, the impact produced by the collision of the clear and turbid chi was naturally even less likely to cause any damage to the magic treasure. The magic treasure was like an unshakable barrier that firmly blocked the surroundings of the Great Path, so that the Great Path wouldn't be affected by the impact at all. At the point where the clear and turbid chi collided, the scene of their battle in the Great Path reappeared once again. Endless worlds were born, evolved, and destroyed. In the process of the countless worlds appearing and being destroyed, a strange suction force appeared and began to gradually absorb the ominous aura in the surroundings. The ominous aura was continuously sucked into those worlds, and as if it was being consumed by those worlds, it began to gradually disappear. This great calamity evil chi was already the last great calamity evil chi that existed in this world. Although the collision of the clear and turbid chi wasn't as closely related to the great calamity evil chi as it was when Luo-Fan and the Holy Venerable were fighting, it still wasn't like before. It wouldn't directly cause the great calamity evil chi to disappear like before. However, it still affected the great calamity evil chi after all, and it would also consume the great calamity evil chi. This was because the karma between Luo-Fan and the Holy Venerable wasn't completely resolved. This kind of consumption wouldn't be obvious at any other time. It wouldn't change much for the situation of this world. However, it was different at this time. At this time, all the great calamity evil chi in the world was there, all around the clear and turbid chi. They all existed around the countless worlds and endless space-time produced by the collision of the clear and turbid chi. As a result, of course, the great calamity evil chi that was absorbed by the space-time produced by the collision of the two could only be absorbed from the surroundings. Therefore, it resulted in this result at this moment. Seeing that this method was effective, Luo Fan and the Holy Venerable were, of course, overjoyed. They controlled the collision of the clear and turbid chi to become more intense, more frequent, and faster. The birth and evolution of those worlds. Annihilation became more and more frequent because of this. Naturally, the speed of absorbing the great calamity evil chi became faster and faster. The surrounding great calamity evil chi gradually decreased during this process. As the great calamity evil chi decreased, it had a great impact on the saint essence. This kind of impact made it impossible to see the fundamental change of the saint essence in a short period of time. However, one could see the impact from what the saint essence was doing. At this moment, the world annihilating divine thunder was slowly squeezing into the mysterious world from the outside. However, the speed at which it squeezed through the barrier was getting slower and slower. Finally, after a few days, when 1/3 of the great calamity evil chi had squeezed in and made Saint Yuan feel more and more pressured, it finally stopped. It was like his head was stuck on the railing. This change made the faces of the three people in the mysterious world relax. If there were no accidents, it was obvious. This time, the great calamity of heaven and earth should have been over. As for the vast world outside the mysterious world, the world gold elixir, as long as the great path was not damaged. The Holy Venerable could use the great path to gather the endless space-time fragments again, or directly create something out of thin air. This was something that could be done with just a thought, but it would not be a problem. At this moment, an angry roar came from the saint essence of the world annihilating saint. Don't think that it's over. Along with such a loud roar, the saint essence of the world annihilating saint suddenly moved. It was like an ordinary person carrying a mountain on his back. Every centimeter he moved seemed to be at the cost of severe damage to a part of his body. During the process of moving, countless tiny fragments were constantly thrown out of his body. However, even so, the saint essence's movement speed was unimaginably fast. In a flash, both of his hands actually penetrated the bodies of Luo Fan and the Holy Venerable, who were separated on both sides, at the same time in an extremely strange manner. This kind of unimaginable speed did not seem to require any time at all, so Luo Fan and the Holy Venerable could not react in time. They only heard the world annihilating saint's voice and then felt a heat in their chests, as if something was directly inserted into their chests. The world annihilating saint's somewhat proud voice rang out. After this voice, the world annihilating saint's voice completely disappeared. As the voice completely disappeared, the saint essence of the world annihilating saint also disappeared. At the very least, it was the saint essence outside of the bodies of Luo Fan and the Holy Venerable. However, the saint essence in the bodies of Luo Fan and the Holy Venerable had penetrated through the layers of barriers, infinite time and space, and even the barriers of supreme authority that both of them possessed. It had directly entered the depths of their life source, grabbed their life source, and completely integrated with it. Then, this part of the saint essence was gradually destroyed at the same time and gradually disappeared. Along with it, the Holy Venerable and Luo Fan's life source was also destroyed. At this moment, an extremely strong sense of danger enveloped Luo Fan and the Holy Venerable. The life source was the most important existence for a cultivator, and it was the same for this incarnation. If the life source was fine, for an existence at Luo Fan's level, no matter how serious an injury was, it would not be considered an injury. He would be able to recover completely in an instant with just a thought. However, once the life source was destroyed, even if the body was intact, the result would be instant death. There was no other possibility. In the end, I still can't escape. At this moment, a voice resounded in Luo Fan's mind from the world he had derived from comprehending the sage's divine ability. This was the voice of the saint that was born in that world. After the sage said this, Yeshua nodded. Suddenly, a palm directly reached out from that world, passed through the infinite time and space in Luo Fan's body, and arrived directly at his life source. With a slight grasp, it integrated with the life source. The saint essence, which was heading towards destruction and death, was grabbed out. In an instant, it shrank and returned to that world. This change happened extremely quickly. It was almost over in the blink of an eye. Before Luo Fan could fully sense the danger that had appeared, that danger had already passed. It was so fast that even Luo Fan could not react in time. It was so fast that even Luo Fan could not react in time. At this moment, an indifferent voice rang out from the world in his mind. I think our karma should be considered over. Just as Luo Fan was about to reply, he suddenly realized something that made him feel extremely complicated. The world in his mind that was derived from the saint's magical power suddenly collapsed inch by inch, along with all the living beings in it and the strange chaotic state within it. Even the saint within started to crumble inch by inch. At this moment, Luo Fan knew what was going on. It was clear that after the saint pulled the saint's essence that was being destroyed into the world could not withstand the destruction of the saint's essence. In fact, even the saint could not withstand the destruction of the saint's essence. So he let the world and the saint himself. Hence, the world and the saint himself were completely destroyed along with the destruction of the saint essence. Why bother? I'm just an incarnation. If I die, I'll just lose an incarnation. Is it worth destroying the entire world to save me? Is it so important to end this karma? Luo Fan sighed at this time. The world, along with the saint, had perished together with the destruction of that part of the saint's essence. This might seem unbelievable, but it was actually very normal. Although the world in Luo Fan's mind was extremely complete, it was still not the real world. Although the saint born from it was not weak, there was still a huge gap between him and a world destroyer saint in terms of reality. As a result, the destruction of the saint essence was naturally not something he could withstand. Pulling the saint essence, which was heading towards destruction and death, into that world would naturally result in the destruction of the world, and the saint. Just as Luo Fan was being saved by the saint in the world in his mind, a saint from the saint's side also made a move. The one who made a move was naturally the only saint that existed in the unseen world, Saint Yuan Bai. Just as the sacred venerate's life origin was being pulled towards destruction by the sage essence, Sage Yuan Bai raised his hand and reached deep into the sacred venerate's life origin. He grabbed the sage essence that existed above the sacred venerate's life origin. The reason why he was able to grab it so smoothly was because the world destroyer saint had used the destruction of his saint essence to break through all obstacles. If not for this, even if Saint Yuan Bai was a saint in this world with endless magic powers, he would not have been able to directly touch the saint's life force when faced with the Creator's authority. This should be enough to end the karma of creation. Saint Yuan Bai looked at the saint essence that was being destroyed, as well as her body that was being destroyed along with the saint essence. She sighed. With this sigh, her body completely disappeared. As her body completely disappeared, her chaotic origin's spiritual treasure instantly let out a sorrowful cry. Then, it directly released the great path and rushed up, directly wrapping around the world destroyer thunder. With a shake, it collapsed and disappeared without a trace along with the world destroyer thunder. No. The saint came back to his senses and shouted in shock and anger. He used his omnipotent authority to try his best to gather the remaining saint essence of Saint Yuan Bai's life force again. However, in the end, he realized that this was simply beyond the limits of his ability. No matter how hard he tried, even if he turned back time, he could not make Saint Yuan Bai stay. Realizing this, the saint's face turned pale. It was as if the most important thing to him had disappeared. Luo Fan also came back to his senses at this time. He suddenly had an inexplicable thought. Could it be that there's a story between the saint and Saint Yuan Bai? Of course, this was not the time to raise this kind of speculation. Therefore, he said, Don't worry, my friend. Saint Yuan Bai is a heaven and earth saint who used his own strength to prove his Tao and become a saint. His essence has the characteristics of immortality. Although it seems to have disappeared now, it is only temporary. As long as heaven and earth are complete again, she will naturally be able to revive in the future. If my friend has the heart, perhaps it will happen very quickly. The saint's eyes lit up when he heard Luo Fan's words. That's right. She is different from the World Destroyer saint. In an instant, the saint's fighting spirit was greatly boosted. His expression was full of determination. At this time, a golden light appeared out of nowhere and directly shrouded the unseen world, including the great Tao in the unseen world. This was obviously the arrival of the reward for surviving the calamity of heaven and earth. As the golden light shrouded the great Tao, which was originally filled with countless cracks like a pile of sand, on the great Tao that could collapse and be destroyed at any time, the endless cracks began to quickly close up. In the blink of an eye, all the cracks disappeared, and the great Tao became complete again. However, at this stage, the golden light still did not disappear, and the changes of the great Tao did not subside either. Endless golden light continued to enter the great Tao. The great path, on the other hand, was like a small tree that was growing. It began to grow and strengthen at a shocking speed. Almost every blink of an eye was a kind of change. Almost every instant, almost every moment, there was endless growth. In just a short while, the great Tao had already undergone earth-shattering changes. The scale of the great Tao itself did not increase by much. It had only increased by 10 times. However, the nature of the great Tao had already undergone an earth-shattering upgrade in this short period of time. The mysteries of the great Tao contained within it had become even more magnificent and vast. Faintly, the traces of unnaturalness that had originally been man-made had already faded away. Countless tiny and subtle mysteries were born from the golden light, filling up the tiny gaps that originally existed in the great Tao. What was born from this was a transformation that far surpassed the various transformations that originally existed in the great Tao, a transformation that was billions of times greater. Because of this change, the nature of the great Tao had been improved by countless times. At this moment, Luo Fan greedily absorbed all the changes that occurred in the process of the great Tao's evolution. He tried his best to remember the specific process of the great Tao's evolution in his heart, and he tried his best to absorb the countless changes as his own. The mysteries of every change in the great Tao could almost be compared to the mysteries of hundreds and thousands of sage divine abilities. Therefore, even though Luo Fan had the highest authority in this world, it was difficult for him to fully comprehend the mysteries within. He could only try his best to absorb the mysteries that he had comprehended. However, even so, it was already an unimaginably huge gain for Luo Fan. Almost in an instant, he felt that his cultivation realm had greatly increased. The 9th step that was originally extremely far away, below the saint level, was suddenly easily brought to his feet. It felt like he only needed to gently lift his foot to step onto the 9th step. This feeling clearly meant that because he had absorbed the mysteries of the great Tao's evolution, his cultivation realm had unknowingly risen to the peak of the 8th level of the pseudo-saint realm. He was only one step away from breaking through the limit and becoming a 9th level of the pseudo-saint realm. Of course, increasing one's cultivation realm was a process of accumulation after all. However, it cannot be done overnight. Next, although he felt that he had gained a lot, and felt that he had experienced countless mysteries of the great Tao's evolution, his cultivation realm also seemed to have improved quite a bit. Chapter 1471. Luo Fan felt that the entire process of change was very long, but in fact, it was developing extremely quickly. Or rather, in this process of development, time had also undergone an inconceivable change, causing time to become meaningless at this moment. The change of the great Tao soon reached its limit. A true great Tao that was on the same level as the perfect world appeared directly in front of Luo Fan and the Holy Venerate. Luo Fan had some enlightenment in the process and pushed his cultivation realm to the peak of level 8 pseudo-sage. As the creator of this world, the Holy Venerate naturally received greater benefits. Vaguely, an eternal and indestructible aura that was thousands of times stronger than the aura emitted by ordinary holy wills appeared on his body. It was the aura of a sage. This aura was so strong and mysterious that it actually had some characteristics of the essence of a sage. At the same time, the holy will contained in the Holy Venerate's eyes was many times stronger than before. Looking at his eyes, Luo Fan even felt that he seemed to see the eyes of Sage Yuan by that had disappeared. These were the eyes of a sage. Obviously, the Holy Venerate was no longer a sage in this world. Although he did not become a sage, whether it was the power of his magical power or the essence of life, they had already reached the level of a pseudo-sage. When the great Tao completely stabilized and no longer changed, it suddenly collapsed. The great Tao suddenly struggled. The gray, almost chaotic, strange state that existed around the gold core of the world was pulled by the great Tao and began to break through the barrier of the Earth's universe gathering. It broke through the gap between the Earth's universe and the chaotic state. It began to be extremely difficult. It went deep into the chaotic state. Although the entire process was extremely simple, it was not a simple process. However, the mystery contained in it included everything that the great Tao in front of Luo Fan and the Holy Venerate had. At this moment, the great Tao, it was as if a machine made of countless gears was operating with great difficulty. Every bit of the great Tao released unimaginable power in this process, breaking through the barrier of this world and resisting the state of chaos that was about to come into contact with it. At the same time, it began to bind the chaotic state around it, breaking it down and reconstructing it. Gradually, it constructed a brand new, mysterious, in the blink of an eye. In Luo Fan and the Lord's perception, the scene had returned to its original state. At least, it was the state before it collapsed. Moreover, after that, it continued to grow, becoming more and more profound, more and more illusory, and its nourishment towards the great Tao became even more untraceable. Luo Fan and the Lord had the highest authority in this world. Even now, this kind of authority, it still existed. Therefore, the two of them could clearly sense everything that was happening in this world. Indeed, at the same time, they clearly understood how the great Tao constructed the state of chaos before their eyes. He had also completely comprehended the nourishing effect of the great Tao in the unseen world and understood why the great Tao needed to exist in the unseen world. Then, at the same time, they could also know that outside the unseen world, the layer of nothingness was rapidly being constructed. The layer of rules and laws was being constructed. The layer of time and space on the surface had already appeared in an instant. A more and more complete golden elixir of the world was gradually taking shape. However, after all, the great Tao had not completely entered the state of chaos. Therefore, although they could already see the appearance of the golden elixir of the world, it was only limited to outside the Earth's universe. For inside the Earth's universe, the great Tao was still the great Tao, and the destroyed world was still destroyed. If someone could observe the Earth's universe from outside the Earth's universe, they would see that the Earth's universe was like giving birth, slowly giving birth to a golden elixir of the world. Bit by bit, the golden elixir of the world was being squeezed out of the Earth's universe, as the contact between the world and the state of chaos became larger and larger. In the unseen world, the great Tao began to tremble slightly. Faintly, there were even rattling noises coming from within. Then, there were wisps of smoke that seemed to be part of the great Tao, the color of which could not be described with words, floating out of the great Tao. Luo Fan looked at the smoke and instantly knew that it was the impurities of the great Tao. It was the part of the great Tao that was left behind from the time when it was still imperfect, and it was not suitable for the true state of chaos. These mysteries were also very profound. If any cultivator obtained them, they would definitely improve by leaps and bounds, and even achieve a sublimation of their essence. However, at this time, in the face of the state of chaos, in order to truly exist in the state of chaos without any danger, these are the impurities that had to be eliminated. Although they knew that these mysteries of the great Tao were still quite precious, be it Luo Fan or the Lord, they did not pay any attention to them at all. These seemingly mysterious mysteries of the great Tao might be extremely precious to ordinary cultivators, but to them, they were completely insignificant. They would not even have the desire to collect them. At this moment, Luo Fan was extremely greedy as he remembered and comprehended everything. This was the key process of the world, going from imperfect to perfect. This was the sublimation of the world's essence. This process could even be compared to the process of a cultivator becoming a sage. The principles contained in this process were extremely important for his future cultivation, so he naturally could not miss any opportunity. A world that looked similar to the previous one, but was completely different in essence, gradually appeared outside of this unseen world. This world, similar to the previous one, was only the appearance. But the difference was, it was the essence. In the previous world, even though it had reached the level of the demon realm and reached an incredible level, but in essence, it was still a vast thousand world. It was still a vast thousand world that could not withstand the birth of a real sage. But now, although the appearance was similar, this world was already a perfect world, a world that could truly exist in the state of chaos. It could resist the assimilation of the state of chaos, and it could support the birth of a real sage. It was a perfect world. This difference in essence made this world. It began to emit an aura that shocked even Luo Fan. It was a grand, vast aura. More and more world golden elixirs appeared outside of the Earth's universe. 1/3, 1/2, 2/3, 5/6, 6/7, 7/8, 8/8. As more and more world golden elixirs appeared outside the world. In the state of chaos, an increasingly strong sense of independence appeared in the heart of Luo Fan's incarnation. This sense of independence was not just because the connection between him and his main body was becoming weaker and weaker. There was also a feeling that was shrouding his head. The stronger and greater power could no longer control or restrain him. It was a feeling of true independence. Luo Fan's thinking speed was extremely fast, and he instantly understood what was going on. This was the feeling of this world being completely cut off from the Earth's universe. If the golden elixir of this world was truly formed in the state of chaos, then the relationship between this world and the Earth's universe would become the same as the relationship between the primordial world and the Earth's universe. At that time, the connection between his incarnation and the main body of the Earth's universe would naturally become the same as the main body of the Earth's universe and the main body of the primordial world. However, it would obtain relative independence. It would become his other self. As for the feeling of being unable to control or restrain himself because of the great power, it was even simpler. After he left the Earth universe, the gazes of the 7 true saints, who were originally looking down at him from Supreme Place, would also be cut off, at least. At least, they would be greatly weakened. Seeing that the world golden elixir was getting closer and closer to leaving the Earth's universe, Luo Fan finally sighed. He smiled at the Holy Venerable and said, "Since the great tribulation of heaven and earth has passed, it's not appropriate for me to continue staying here. If we are fated to meet again in the future, let's meet again in the chaos." If the incarnation did not leave now, it would soon be able to occupy the supreme authority in this perfect world that was taking shape. It would also obtain relative independence and endless benefits. However, this perfect world belonged to the Holy Venerable after all. As an outsider, he had truly obtained the supreme authority. This was like picking a peach. From then on, he and the Holy Venerable would definitely become mortal enemies. In the incomparably long years to come, he would definitely fight with the Holy Venerable. However, this was not what he was willing to do. It was not like he had no way out, and he could only place his last hope on the perfect world of the Holy Venerable. Why should he do such a strenuous and unrewarding thing? When the holy venerable heard what Luo Fan said, he could faintly see that he had already heaved a sigh of relief. Then, he gritted his teeth and said, "If it weren't for your help this time, this world would not have been able to successfully survive the seventh great tribulation of heaven and earth. If I don't repay such a great kindness, I will not be at ease. This mark is my heaven-opening mark. It contains all my understanding of the heaven-opening mark and the tribulation transcendence experience. It may be beneficial to you. I hope you will accept it." As he spoke, an extremely complicated mark was shot out from his hand. It directly floated in front of Luo Fan and fell into his hand. When Luo Fan saw this heaven-opening mark, his eyes lit up. This was a good thing. Although he had participated in the process of this world surviving the seventh great tribulation of heaven and earth, he was, after all, an outsider. His identity prevented him from truly observing and truly grasping all the subtle changes that had occurred in this process. However, with this mark, it was different. He immediately took the mark and did not have time to comprehend it. He bowed to the holy venerable and thanked him for his generous gift. Then, he quickly turned his body and turned into a stream of light. He left this world and returned to the Earth universe. Just as he left the world golden core and stood still in the Earth universe, the last bit of light from the world golden core instantly disappeared in front of him. He had truly left the Earth universe and obtained true freedom. The world golden core was free, but Luo Fan was once again trapped in the shackles and shackles. A sense of restraint that was different from when he was in the world golden core once again enveloped his body, making him feel an inexplicable sense of oppression. Knowing that this was a normal change, he once again suppressed this feeling of oppression. Then, with an idea in his mind, he used his detection ability that had reached the peak of the 8th level of the pseudo-sage realm to break through the shackles of the Earth universe. He carefully sensed the state of chaos, wanting to find the location of the world golden core. However, it was a pity that he could not find any trace of the world golden core. It was as if the world golden core had not entered the state of chaos. Instead, it seemed to have completely disappeared and been destroyed. Luo Fan sighed. He knew that his realm was not enough. Even though he knew that the world golden core was extremely close to the Earth universe, he could not break through the barrier of the state of chaos. Find it. The state of chaos was extremely mysterious. Every point of it was enough to evolve countless perfect worlds. The state of chaos that Luo Fan had always sensed seemed boundless to him. But in fact, it might even be just a trace, an insignificant wisp. It was just a state of chaos that could even be ignored. As long as there was a trace of a gap between the world golden core and the Earth universe, even if there was a trace of the state of chaos between them, it was no longer something that the current Luo Fan could cross. He sighed. He looked down at the heaven-opening mark in his hand. After leaving the golden core of that world, this imprint underwent a subtle change. Vaguely, it had turned into a golden, illusory pill. It rotated slightly in Luo Fan's hand, just like the real world golden core. In the world golden core, light and shadow changed. It seemed that there was a vast and boundless world inside. His heart moved, and his perception cut into the mark. Endless information rushed into his heart along with his perception. It made him feel as if he had incarnated into the saint and began to experience everything that the saint had experienced in that world. The saint had existed in that world for even longer than the time he had lived in the demon realm. Even Luo Fan. As soon as he received this information, he felt as if his head was about to swell, and his life essence was on the verge of exploding. After a while, Luo Fan finally had to cut off his connection with the heaven-opening mark. If he continued to receive it, he would probably have to float here for thousands or even tens of thousands of years before he could completely absorb the memories contained in the mark. And this was obviously not appropriate. In this position, there was a perfect world that had broken through the Earth universe. It had caused a huge commotion. He did not know how many powerful existences were rushing over, but he could not stay here any longer. With a thought, Luo Fan lifted his foot and took a light step forward. His figure directly stepped into the dusky world, in the gap between the world and the state of chaos. As soon as he left the void, tens of thousands of figures came from all directions and filled the void. Each of these figures emitted a holy will aura that was close to that of a sage. It was an aura that was eternal and indestructible. Each of them was an ultimate venerable who had obtained a holy will. These ultimate venerables did not come from the same world. Some of them came from the demon realm, some from the central main world, and some from another world that Luo Fan did not know about. These ultimate venerables had been attracted here because they had sensed a supreme vibration in the void. They had not colluded with each other at all. Before they came here, they even thought that only a few ultimate venerables that they knew would also be here. However, when they arrived here and saw the figures that had appeared, everyone was indescribably shocked. They felt as if their views of the world had been turned upside down. There were actually so many existences in the countless worlds that could rival them. They had initially thought that they were rare and noble, but there were actually so many existences that were not inferior to them. One could imagine the impact this had on their minds. They quietly floated in the void, their auras surging in power, surging as they constructed a place specifically for them to stay. It looked like tens of thousands of worlds had appeared in the void. They were distributed around the spot where the world golden core had disappeared, almost forming a vortex. Although the world golden core had disappeared, it had existed here for tens of thousands of years, so there were naturally many traces left behind. These traces were illusory and obscure to ordinary cultivators, so they could not be detected. However, the world golden core had existed here for tens of thousands of years, so there were naturally many traces left behind. These traces were illusory and obscure to ordinary cultivators, so they could not be detected. Naturally, they wouldn't find the wrong place. No one spoke at this moment. The void seemed to be completely silent. Faced with so many supreme venerables at once, no matter how confident or arrogant one was, one's confidence would suffer a huge blow. However, this situation only lasted for a short while. After all, they were all supreme venerables. To be able to reach this stage, which one of them was not a peerless genius? Who would be stupid in the heart after the impact? However, they quickly adjusted their mentality. They began to communicate with each other. I wonder if fellow Venerable has discovered anything after arriving here. One of the Venerables who arrived later asked the Venerables who arrived earlier. I'm just a step ahead of you, but I know as much as you do. The supremacy that arrived first replied in a friendly manner. This question and answer had broken the deadlock. It gave them the opportunity to get to know each other. Apart from them, the other Supreme Venerable ones also used similar methods to open up the opportunity to get to know each other. Soon enough, the silence among the several tens of thousands of Supreme Venerable ones in the void was broken. Needless to say, every Supreme Venerable one would keep their guard up. Even though they knew each other, they still had some reservations about their own world. They had a tacit understanding not to mention or ask about it. Almost every Supreme Venerable shifted their attention to the other Supreme Venerables. Relatively speaking, it was the Venerables who attracted them here. Previously, when the golden core of the world left Earth's universe, they were extremely shocked and felt that they were extremely insignificant. However, they gradually ignored it. For Supreme Venerable ones, whose cultivation time could only be measured by billions and trillions of years, the concept of time was actually extremely vague. Therefore, during the process of the tens of thousands of Supreme Venerables communicating in the void, a few hundred years had passed. At first, they were just getting to know each other, but in the end, they started to discuss the Tao. Even in the demon realm, Supreme Venerables were quite rare. Even if they wanted to find other Venerables to discuss the Tao with them, they would usually only have a very rare chance to meet one. Usually, there would only be a few of them, and a dozen of them would be considered great. Even the demon realm, which had 54 saints, was like that, let alone the other realms. The Supreme Venerables would only be lonelier. The tens of thousands of Supreme Venerables, who were extremely lonely and could not find other Venerables to discuss the Tao with, met up. How could they let go of such a chance to discuss the Tao with each other? In the beginning, they would definitely test each other when they were not familiar with each other, but once they became more familiar with each other, they naturally could not wait to start. Auspicious clouds formed by the cultivation paths of the Supreme Venerables gradually appeared in the void. Each of these auspicious clouds represented the cultivation path of a Supreme Venerable. They all represented mysterious existences that could make even a level 9 pseudo-sage want to give up everything in exchange for a chance to comprehend them. However, at this moment, there were tens of thousands of them. They intertwined like ordinary clouds and formed an even wider auspicious cloud, causing a world made of auspicious clouds to appear in the void. The world made of auspicious clouds completely covered all traces of the golden core of the world. In other words, it replaced the traces and became the source of attracting cultivators. This Tao discussion was so grand, so vast. The Tao discussion that Luo Fan had participated in, which was hosted by the Sacred Venerable, had become so insignificant compared to the Tao discussion this time. The discussion lasted for an extremely long time. Over 10,000 years later, all the Supreme Venerables withdrew their auspicious clouds in satisfaction, and the discussion of unprecedented scale came to an end. The discussion was of an unimaginable standard for ordinary cultivators, and it had truly changed the situation on Earth and the universe. All the Supreme Venerables present knew that the situation in the universe would completely change from today onward. Chapter 1472. Luo Fan naturally wouldn't predict what would happen to the worlds after the golden core of that world left. At this moment, his clone had already returned to the world he had created and returned to where his main body was, bringing everything he had experienced back to his main body. All the fruits of his cultivation were returned to his main body. At this moment, the almost perfect world that Luo Fan had created had already passed through the 5th Great Tribulation of the world, and was not far from the 6th Great Tribulation of the world. When his main body received all the cultivation achievements from his clone, he suddenly trembled and a look of joy appeared on his face. Even though his clone had not escaped his control over the years, and he knew all of the gains and accomplishments of his clone, it was impossible for him to escape. However, the two of them were in 2 completely different time dimensions after all. His senses and control couldn't compare to when he had completely fused with his clone. That was why, before this, there was still a gap in the harvest, and it was unable to reach true perfection. Only now, after his clone had fused with his main body, could he truly obtain all the gains that his clone had gained over the years. That included the Sage Mystique. This sane ability is the biggest gain this time. Luo Fan sighed. He made a grabbing motion with his hand, and strands of karma appeared in his hand. They were like living creatures that casually shuttled back and forth. After carefully sensing the feeling of the sane ability, Luo Fan dispersed the sane ability, allowing the strands of karma to return to the world and disappear in front of him. After this world had passed through the previous 5 major tribulations, it had also undergone earth-shattering changes. The appearance of the entire world was no longer the same as before. All of them seemed so mysterious and profound. As for the law layer, it had already been divided into 6 layers. Among them, the complexity of the laws was stacked layer by layer, and when it reached the 6th layer, the complexity of the laws had reached an unbelievable level. Only a level 9 pseudo-saint would be able to comprehend a little bit of it. Therefore, although the living beings in this world were categorized into the mortal realm, bodiless immortal, true immortal, golden immortal, primordial immortal, pure young primordial immortal, level 9 pseudo-saint, and ultimate venerable realm, the living beings in this world were divided into different realms. However, it was different from other worlds. However, there was another way of dividing the realms, and that was according to the rules and laws they could comprehend. They were divided into 6 levels. The first void rank, the second void rank, the third void rank, all the way to the 6th void rank. It was unknown how many billions of cultivators existed in this world. Those dozens of realms were directly divided into 6 levels. The first level was the void level, which included cultivators who had just begun to sense the laws of laws, and had yet to ascend to immortality. It included cultivators who had attained immortality, all the way to itinerant immortals and even true immortals. On the other hand, the second void realm included living beings from the itinerant immortal realm or true immortal realm all the way up to the innate golden immortal realm. Only the third void level, the fourth void level, all the way to the fifth void level, was similarly a huge division, containing cultivators who needed many levels of cultivation. However, the sixth void level only contained one realm. He was a level 9 false saint, or, to put it more precisely, it was a level 9 false saint and a supreme venerable. Compared to the orthodox division of cultivation realms, this division was of course cruder, but it was more accepted by all living beings in this world, because this division truly reflected the difference between cultivators. It let every cultivator clearly know how far they were from the peak, and how far they were from achieving their goal of becoming an immortal existence that could not be defeated by thousands of tribulations. There was a legend in this world. This world was not complete yet. When the seventh void of this world was formed, sages would appear. When they could sense the seventh void and comprehend the mysteries of the seventh void, they would become sages. This legend appeared without a reason. Even Luo Fan could not tell where it came from. Before his incarnation returned, he even thought that this legend was ridiculous and only a fantasy of mortals. However, when his incarnation brought back all his memories, he suddenly realized that this legend might be true. When the seventh void of this world, which was also the seventh layer of laws and laws, was formed, there might really be a sage in this world. However, this kind of sage would only be a sage of this world, a false sage that belonged to this world. After understanding this, Luo Fan suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of relief. He had a vague guess in his heart. Although this kind of false sage was also eternal and indestructible, it might be different from the false sages of other worlds. It was impossible for them to be omniscient like the false sages of other worlds. At the very least, it was impossible for them to be omniscient like Yuan Bai Sage and the World Annihilation Sage in the world created by the Sacred Venerable. This was because the laws and laws of this world were layered. This kind of layering allowed many cultivators to go up and comprehend the mysteries they needed to comprehend layer by layer, thereby breaking the shackles of their own cultivation realm. However, at the same time, because of this layering of laws and laws, this world was actually a layered world. As for sages, they only occupied the seventh layer in this world. On top of this, there were still the uncompleted eighth and ninth layers. Although these layers were not completed yet, they had already separated a small part of this world, causing this world to have some invisible restrictions. Although these layers were not completed now, they would appear in the future. The connection between the past, present, and future was actually not that important to this world. Therefore, the things that would appear in the future would also affect the current space-time structure and would also occupy the current state of this world. However, this kind of restriction did not exist for the creator of this world, Luo Fan. He could completely control everything in this world and could even completely control the worlds that had not been separated yet. This way, it would create a result that was not specially designed by Luo Fan, but would inevitably appear. That was, Luo Fan would have absolute control over the false sages that were born in this world. Even if these false sages appeared, he would be able to easily defeat them and then easily wipe them out. When he discovered this, an indescribable sense of relief surged in Luo Fan's heart. Previously, after knowing that this world would actually give birth to a sage after going through several great tribulations, Luo Fan felt an inexplicable pressure in his heart. He was constantly thinking about how he should deal with the sages that were born in this world in the future. Being able to convince Sage Yuan Bai was also a factor of luck. He could not guarantee that he could use words to sway any sage. Now that he discovered that he had the ability to completely control these false sages, he naturally completely relaxed. In this world, compared to the world of the Holy Venerate, the Golden Core Cultivation Civilization was more prosperous. The number of cultivators here was more than twice that of the golden core cultivators in that world. Among so many cultivators, the number of level 9 false sages and supreme supremacies was also 2 to 3 times that of the golden core cultivators in that world. It could be said that apart from the fact that there were no sages, the cultivation civilization of this world was already far stronger than that of the golden core cultivators in that world. However, even though there were so many cultivators, it was nothing compared to the vast and boundless world that was even more prosperous than the demon realm. The entire world was still vast and sparsely populated, and the cultivation resources were not exhausted because of the existence of so many cultivators. This was also normal. After cultivators reached the Khanate Zenith Heaven realm, they would be able to be self-sufficient and not rely on external forces. The consumption of cultivation resources from the outside world had almost been reduced to the minimum. In fact, after they died, they could even nourish the world and leave the endless vitality and resources that they had created in this world. In this way, as long as it was within a tolerable range, the more cultivators there were, the more beneficial it would be for this world. However, there would be no worry of resources being exhausted. As the creator of this world, Luo Fan had all kinds of privileges. Among them, clearly sensing the moment when the great tribulation of heaven and earth arrived was one of them. At this moment, Luo Fan clearly knew that this world was still more than 1 billion years away from its 6th great tribulation of heaven and earth. For Luo Fan, who had lived in this world for an unknown number of trillions of years, this period of time was not considered a long time. With a thought, Luo Fan raised his hand and pointed. The heaven-splitting axe appeared in front of him and turned into the appearance of a boy. "This is my world. Go and cultivate on your own," Luo Fan said calmly, while looking at the confused heaven-splitting boy. When heaven-splitting boy heard this, he asked curiously, "Master, is this your world? What a high-level world. It's even more high-level than the world that my former master was born in." Luo Fan smiled and said, "I still have a magic treasure with intelligence in this world. If you're fated, you might be able to meet it in the future." With that, he raised his hand and waved, and the boy disappeared in front of him. His current location was not in normal space-time. Instead, he was even further away from the layer of laws. In other words, he was above the 6th layer of laws and below the layer of nothingness. Due to the uniqueness of the structure of the law layer and the existence of the 7th, 8th, and 9th law layer in the future, this place was in an extremely wondrous state. It was a kind of dusky, chaotic state, but it was not a true state of chaos, nor was it a strange state that was purely simulating the state of chaos. This state was different from the residence of the sage in the world in his heart, and it was also different from the residence of Sage Yuan Bai in the world's golden core. However, it was also a strange state that could make Luo Fan feel unprecedentedly comfortable. In this world, even level 9 pseudo-sanctuaries and supreme venerables could not come into contact with it, let alone enter it. This world had grown to a higher level than the demon realm, and it was even more vast. Although it wasn't a perfect world, it was much closer to it than the demon realm. Such a vast world was naturally enough for any cultivator to cultivate here. Therefore, Luo Fan had already put the divine creation boy and the sky maiden into it, allowing them to adventure and train as much as they wanted in this world. Although only tens of thousands of years had passed in the outside world, billions of years had passed here. After such a long time, the divine creation boy had long been promoted to a level 9 pseudo-sanctuary treasure. The Sky Maiden was different from the divine creation boy. Her priority was to condense her own worldview, but the speed of her cultivation realm improvement seemed to be slower than the divine creation boy's. She was only a level 6 pseudo-sanctuary now. Of course, although she was slightly weaker than Luo Fan as a level 6 pseudo-sanctuary, all cultivators below level 9 pseudo-sanctuary were no longer a match for her. Although she could not be called a venerable, she was already regarded as the strongest person below level 9 venerables by the heaven and earth venerables. This was because she had her own worldview, which was essentially higher than all the cultivators in this world. Therefore, even if she did not need Luo Fan to give her the authority, she could break through the shackles of the 6th level and freely enter where Luo Fan was. However, after all, she did not have the highest authority in this world. Therefore, although she could come here, she would not feel any comfort. Instead, she would only feel an indescribable pressure, as if there were billions of mountains pressing on her at all times. She felt extremely uncomfortable. Therefore, the Sky Maiden rarely came here, unless she really missed Luo Fan. As for giving the authority to the Sky Maiden, although Luo Fan had thought about it before, he gave up on the idea in the end. It was not that he was reluctant to give up the supreme authority, but he knew that obtaining the supreme authority in this world was not a good thing for the Sky Maiden. The Sky Maiden had his protection in this world. She would not be in any danger at all. Whether she had the supreme authority or not, it would not make any difference to her. However, if she had the supreme authority, she would no longer have any challenges in this world. She would be able to see through everything in this world at a glance. In this way, how could she achieve the effect of training in this world? Because of this, even though it was only a matter of a thought for him to give her the supreme authority, Luo Fan did not do it. He only protected her in the dark. Then, he would let her train in this world. After sending Sky-Splitting Child away, Luo Fan began to carefully comprehend the sky-splitting mark that he had obtained from the Lord. He experienced all the memories of the Lord contained in the sky-splitting mark bit by bit. After coming to this world, Luo Fan had the blessing of heaven and earth. He had incredible control over everything that entered this world. It was the same for the sky-splitting mark. As a result, compared to being outside this world and in the void, it was many times easier for him to comprehend the heaven creation brand. In just half a day, he had already absorbed all the memories of the imprint seed into his heart and memorized them completely. In a trance, it was as if he had gone through the experience of a holy venerable and personally cultivated a perfect world from nothing. Compared to what Luo Fan had seen and experienced in the world of the Golden Elixir, the Lord experience was many times richer. The various subtle changes in the process of passing through the great trial of heaven and earth were displayed in Luo Fan's heart. Among them, Luo Fan had seen a completely different method of passing through the great trial of heaven and earth. He felt that his horizons had been broadened. Although the process of the heavenly tribulation wasn't as brilliant as his own, it had a different kind of wonder compared to his own method. It was quite a revelation for Luo Fan, allowing him to unknowingly deepen his understanding of the great tribulation of the heavens and earth. He gradually gained his own understanding of the various deep principles of the heavenly tribulation. It only took him half a day to accept the memories in the sky-splitting mark, but it took a long time for Luo Fan to carefully analyze and comprehend these memories. Time passed unknowingly as Luo Fan comprehended the memories in the sky-splitting mark. In the blink of an eye, more than 100,000 years had passed. On this day, Luo Fan was studying the process of the Lord passing through the 6th great trial of heaven and earth. Suddenly, there was an inexplicable feeling that shrouded him. This feeling was as if in his world, something that was originally very small was suddenly expanding at an unimaginable speed. It was gradually beginning to oppress his world and was trying to seize a part of it for itself. At this moment, Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. All the changes in this world were included in his perception, so he knew what was going on in the blink of an eye. Someone has become a sage. How is this possible? Luo Fan's mind was in shock. There was only a feeling of disbelief in his heart. How could anyone in this world become a sage at this time? The 7th layer of the rule of heaven and earth had not been formed. How could someone break through the limit? He had reached the 7th layer of the rule of heaven and earth, which could only be completed when he had comprehended the 7th layer of the rule of heaven and earth. This change instantly shattered the mentality that he had after accepting the incarnation, the mentality that everything was within his grasp. Could it be that someone can become a sage without the 7th layer of the rule of heaven? Could it be that my previous speculations were all wrong? As he thought of this, his eyes narrowed and instantly locked onto the person who was proving his Tao and becoming a sage. That person, it was a cultivator who looked like a young man. Luo Fan had paid attention to this cultivator before. He was the fastest cultivator to become a supremacy realm cultivator in this world. It only took him 1,000,000,000,000 years to become a supremacy realm cultivator from scratch. He could not help but exclaim in admiration at the strength of his comprehension. At this moment, the young man was on the highest peak of a certain continent. His power surged through his body and spread across the entire world, causing all the cultivators on the tens of thousands of continents in the world to tremble. All the cultivators on the tens of thousands of continents in this world could feel this power, which contained traces of eternal and indestructible power. At the same time, his spirit and his life essence were above the rule of heaven and earth. At the end of the 6th layer of the rule of heaven and earth, madly drilling and attacking, trying to break through the shackles of the 6th layer of the rule of heaven and earth. He wanted to touch the 7th layer of the rule of heaven and earth that had not been formed yet. Originally, this was impossible because the 7th layer of the rule of heaven and earth had not been formed yet. It was impossible for him to touch it. The last time he tried to break through to the sage realm, he failed at this step. Therefore, in the end, he only obtained a holy decree and became a supreme venerable. However, this time, he used some unknown method and actually opened up a possibility among the impossible. Now, there were traces of his spirit and life essence that had broken through the shackles of the 6th layer of the rule of heaven and earth and arrived at the edge of the strange state that Luo Fan was in now. Luo Fan carefully checked his spirit and life essence. He suddenly came to a realization and could not help but smile bitterly. So that's how it is. This person actually changed to cultivate the Tao of time and broke through the barrier of the time dimension. With his current body, he came into contact with the 7th layer of the rule of heaven and earth that will only appear in the future and open up a path to become a false sage among the impossible. As he smiled bitterly, he heaved a sigh of relief and was also filled with admiration. He heaved a sigh of relief because his previous guess was not wrong. As expected, only when the 7th layer of the rule of heaven and earth was formed could a supreme venerable become a sage. What he admired was this cultivator's great wisdom and perseverance. He was actually able to open up such an almost impossible path among the impossible. When it was impossible to become a sage, he borrowed the Tao of time and came into contact with the mysteries of the future, completing such a shocking breakthrough. Ordinary time, Taos couldn't do this. After all, the Great Tribulation of the world was an existence that could even reconstruct and distort time. However, the 7th layer of the rule of heaven and earth could only be formed after the 6th Great Tribulation of the world. Therefore, if he wanted to use the Tao of time to come into contact with the 7th layer of the rule of heaven and earth, he would need to break through the barrier of the Great Tribulation of the world. It was easy to imagine how difficult it was. It was simply an impossible matter. There were 2 reasons why this phenomenon of turning the impossible into a possibility had appeared. One of them was that this cultivator who was in the process of becoming a sage had an unbelievably deep understanding of the Tao of time. It was even possible that he was not inferior to Luo Fan at all. Apart from that, the most important thing was that the probability of surviving the 6th Great Tribulation of the world was almost 100%. In other words, because of Luo Fan's existence, the threat of the 6th Great Tribulation of the world had been reduced to a point where it was almost non-existent. This was why the future where the 7th layer of the rule of heaven and earth was formed was like an anchor, allowing the cultivator who was in the process of becoming a sage to use this anchor to break through the distortion of time caused by the 6th Great Tribulation of the world and come into contact with the 7th layer of the rule of heaven and earth, thus becoming a sage.